I read a verse from the book of Psalms. Come into me, O Lord, even your salvation according to your promise. Let us pray. Faithful and ever gracious God, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. Help us to engage in meaningful discussion. Allow us to grow as a group to bring meaningful changes in our borough of Merton. Fill us with your grace, Heavenly Father, as we make decisions that might affect all who live and work here. And continue to remind us all that what we do and accomplish today is for the service of the people of Merton. We ask in the name of Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
Be seated. Welcome to this meeting of the council and welcome back to the chamber. Please note that this meeting is being filmed for the publication on the council's website and YouTube channel. Therefore, if you are participating in this meeting, you are consenting to being recorded and to the use of those recordings for broadcasting. If you have any queries regarding this, please speak to a council officer. There are no fire drills scheduled this evening, so if the fire alarm sounds, please leave the building immediately by the nearest available fire exit. If you are unable to use the stairs, a member of staff will assist you. The meeting will reconvene if it's safe to do so, if that happens. Otherwise, it will stand adjourned. Members, when you are speaking, the traffic light system here and timer on the screens will indicate when you have 1 minute remaining. You will be operating your own microphones from home, but in the chamber, they'll be operated by officers. Can I also say at that moment that although the 4 minutes is the time that's allocated as a maximum, that is a maximum in the speeches. There's no need. We have a tight agenda and I don't want to prolong it to lose opportunities for people to speak. So please bear that in mind when speaking. Moving on, we repeat what we just did earlier in the apologies. So Councillor Draper.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillors Anderson, Councillor Chung, Councillor Curtin and Councillor Quillam are with us at home today remotely, and Councillor Skeet unfortunately can't be with us tonight.
No apologies, Mr. Mayor.
Through you, Councillor Draper, you can convey the council's best wishes to Councillor Skeet. Are there any declarations of interest? I take the silence as being there are no declarations of interest, so thank you. Are the minutes, we need to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th July 2021. Is there any dissent to the minutes of the meeting held on that date?
Mr. Mayor, I apologise. I do not have a pecuniary interest, but there's a lot of talk this evening about a school of which I'm chair of governors. So I will just note that.
Be so noted. Thank you. Having heard that on reflection, does anyone else wish to declare a non-pecuniary interest? Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I'm deputy chair of governors there as well. So
right. Okay, Councillor Draper. Also. Thank you for that, and thank you for reminding us. So other than that, if there are no, moving back to the minutes, if there are no dissent, I take it that they've agreed. Right. Does the leader have any announcements? The executive have any announcements? Thank you. I'll move briefly on then to talk about, this is the first full meeting for me as mayor, and it's the first full meeting, I think, since Councillor Howard chaired one back in the beginning of 2020. So it's good to see everyone, although I know the situation is still difficult. I have had a full well, it's been a growing agenda of items to go to. There's a number of events I've visited, and I can talk at length of those if you want to have a conversation later on. But I think the highlights of what I've been doing recently is the fact that citizenship ceremonies are up and running again. And I've completed, I think, about 8 of those, and the Deputy Mayor's done 3 or 4 as well, in fact, maybe more. So we've had a full programme of citizenships. We're starting to get out and meet community groups more. And I'm reminded of my time when I was Deputy Mayor back in '94, that the main role of being Mayor is to actually say thank you to people for everything that's going on. So there'll be time maybe to talk at another occasion about some of the things I've been doing, but the citizenship is one. Promoting the vaccine is another. I've been to 3 drop-in clinics for vaccine promotion, particularly with 16 to 17-year-olds, and that's been really encouraging. And I've been to see the good work of AFC Wimbledon and Tooting and Mitcham football clubs recently, and I'm very heartened by what they're doing with young people in our borough, which is great. The Community Fun Day in Pollard's Hill was also a highlight, a great event which was free to all those that turned up, with lots of activities, and again, opportunities for health checks, and my pet topic at the moment, which is vaccination. So that was great as well. I think the most recent highlight as well was the Mayor's charity cricket match, which we won, which was amazing and brilliant. We did have a ringer in terms of a under-19 Pakistan international that was playing for us, or former under-19 Pakistan international, but that helped a bit. But the umpire did say to me, "You have the honour of scoring a 4 on the oldest cricket pitch in the world." So I took that as being a great accolade for myself. So I'm very pleased with that. But thank you to all those involved in arranging it, and particularly thank you to Ed Gretton, Councillor Gretton, Councillor Foley, yes, I've got my heads mixed up there, sorry, for organising the team and getting it all going. Thank you very much, Ed. We've got a few events coming up, so dates for the diary are the 3rd of October, Silver Sunday, and there are still places available on that. So please, if you have any residents in your ward who live alone, who you'd like to put forward to that, it's not too late. We've up to about 40 people so far. We have capacity for more than that. So please do contact Sandra if you have anyone in your ward. And if you'd like to come along and help and serve, it'd be quite nice to get former mayors serving on the day if we can, as well as the mayor serving on the day. That would be great. The 18th of November, we're having a meal at Taste Restaurant, which you'll hear about in the next few days, which is, I'm hijacking a bit because it's around my birthday and about the time I get my freedom pass. So I'm going to celebrate that. But that will be a paid for dinner, a fundraising for the Mayor's Charities. The 4th of December, there will be a big concert coming involving Merton Music Foundation. And in the week following that, hopefully a Christmas dinner at AFC Wimbledon in their main hall. So that will also be great and good fun. So there'll be confirmation of those in the next few days once I've had the meetings to talk about pricing and menus and confirming the date. So, and one last plug, it's not too late. Councillor Macaulay has done a sterling job in her sponsored swim. She had to swim before gathering the names, so we're gathering the names afterwards. But if you'd still like to sponsor Councillor Macaulay for her first swim as Deputy Mayor, that would be wonderful. We're well over 2,000, heading towards 3,000 already. So that's good news. Thank you very much. Having indulged myself, I'll try not to speak too much more from now on than it has to be. So let's move on to the public questions to cabinet members. The next item, that you will have a list in front of you of 19 questions from members of the public. Answers have been provided by the appropriate cabinet member. Each questioner was invited to notify the council in advance of the meeting if they wish to ask a supplementary question. And I have certain names of people who wish to do that. I will call each person in turn. Please, when I call your name, will you unmute your own microphone and keep your supplementary question brief? And to remind you, it's not a statement, it's a question. Firstly, Roy England.
My question, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is a follow-up to that of number 5 on the list. I just would like to ask, what more is there to consider before taking enforcement action, by whom and how long it will take, please?
I'd like to thank Mr. England for his supplementary question. I think it outlines in terms of the steps we have to take before we can actually formally take enforcement action on this case. But I have asked officers to give a further report to myself following up on this council question. But we do take this issue with the utmost seriousness. Thank you.
Thank you. And with your permission, I'll take the next question, which came from my wife.
Not the next question, actually, sorry, but I'll come back to you in a moment, if I may.
Okay, thank you.
Barry Smith.
Hi there. Yeah, thanks for the reply to my question. Your reply states that further electric vehicle charging provision is dependent on funds which may or may not be made available in the future. However, companies such as Chargy have a business model which allows councils to install charging points on lampposts, for example, at zero cost to the council, or even which allow the council to make a profit. Why is the council not taking advantage of such possibilities to install more charging points now?
I want to thank Mr. Smith for his supplementary question and for his original question. And he raises a very important point. So the London Borough of Merton is in the top 20% of local authorities for electric vehicle charging points already. We are waiting for TfL's guidance to inform a pan-London strategy so residents don't need to register multiple accounts for electric vehicles, but this is a priority for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lanning. Sorry for misdirecting the question. Richard Poole. I'm not seeing Richard Poole on the screen. Is Richard Poole there? Right. I'll come back to Mr. England. Paula England has a supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On this one, some basic research will indicate that the vehicle in question is registered to a £1 capital company, has no assets, and is currently in liquidation, and hence there's no point in incurring costs in taking enforcement action. The only hope of recovery of the more than £3,000 owed to the council is in the value of the vehicle. Will the council take action to confiscate the vehicle and sell it in order to offset some of the amounts due to the council, please?
Councillor Lanning.
I would thank Mr. England for his supplementary question. Warrants have been issued for all but one of the 31 PCNs that have been issued, and we will be following up this. Thank you.
Andrew Cunningham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question is number 10 regarding recent flooding, particularly in Lower Morden. So I'm grateful to the Cabinet member for her response and the information contained in that response. But as recent flooding has shown, the council's solutions don't appear to be working. So my supplementary is to ask her whether she'll commit to ensuring that all drains and gullies in Lower Morden have been cleaned and unblocked by the end of September.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham, for your question and your supplementary. I would just like to highlight that they are being checked, and that's down to a lot of the work of Councillor Sandy Kenny from Lower Morden, the councillor there at the moment. She's done a lot of work trying to make sure that these drains and gullies have been inspected, but we can commit to ensuring that they are inspected as part of the programme and that any blockages that are found are dealt with.
Frank Pocock.
Yes, I thank the Cabinet member for her answer. Please, can she tell me the dates that the weeds in the gutters were last sprayed by Veolia in Cannon Hill?
Thank you, Mr. Peacock. I'm afraid I don't have that information for you, but I can get it for you and I'll be happy to make sure you get it.
Joseph Hackett.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her response to my question 17. However, there's been a problem with rubbish in Motspur Park and West Barnes for far too long. Will she commit to meeting with the West Barnes Action Team who submitted this petition on this issue to discuss how the problems can be resolved?
Sorry, Mr. Haggett, could you repeat the question for me? I didn't hear that, sorry. Oh, no, I'd be absolutely happy to meet West Barnes Action Team. I think we're all on the same page here. We want a cleaner, greener Merton, and that's why we commit to trying to keep our streets as clean and tidy as possible. We have cleared 16,000 fly tips, 90% of them within 24 hours. And in the last year, we've generated over £500,000 in fines from fly tipping and littering offences. So we're committed to making this borough cleaner, green, and I'd be more than happy to meet with you to discuss it.
See if Richard Poole is online. Doesn't seem to be, so I will. That concludes the questions from members of the public. Thank you. We will now move to item 6, Councillor's question to Cabinet members. These have been published along with the responses from Cabinet members. I will read out each member's name in the order they appear on the agenda and invite you to ask a supplementary question. Please ensure all supplementary questions are brief and not a statement, as I've said before, and we will get through as many as possible in the time allotted. Councillor Mundy.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for that answer and the zero tolerance approach he has taken in this matter. Would the Cabinet member please provide further details on the partnership approach he and his office have taken with the Scrutiny panel, members of Parliament, officers, residents associations and Clarion that has meant we can be tough on poor repairs while simultaneously tackle the root cause and secure the biggest regeneration scheme in a council's history of over 1,600 rebuilt homes?
Thank you. I have been in close contact with all those organisations in relation to the regeneration, but also as well in terms of following up on repairs issues which have been raised directly with myself. I have had regular meetings with Clarion and have been made perfectly aware for myself that it is unacceptable in terms of their standards of service on those estates, but also as well the number of disrepair issues that have arisen. I look forward to continuing dialogue with all those organisations and working with the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny panel. Thank you.
Thank the Cabinet member for his answer, but there's no specific information in this answer. You actually say you met with ... So clearly that was fill in the gap from the officers, but you didn't fill in the gap. You don't say, and then you say Clarion will follow up. I suppose, is that the vagueness that they followed up in the last decade in Eastfields Estate? My question is what I've just said. There is no information in this answer. I need in the next 3 weeks specific responses on what Clarion will follow up on Phipps Bridge. And I'd like to know who you did meet because it's not in your answer. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
That unlike Councillor Dean, I took the time to actually meet with local residents on Richmond Court and speak to them about their concerns about disrepair. I think that is right to actually go out there and talk direct to them. I'd probably like to ask what Councillor Dean has actually done. I suspect nothing rather than a Twitter quote.
Not a debate. Sit down, please. Please sit down, Councillor Dean. No, you can apply it in writing. Councillor Dollimore.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to thank the leader for his answer to my question and his support to save St Helier Hospital. Does the leader share my concern about the further damage that moving services away from St Helier will do to health outcomes for our residents? And with funding for the project reduced by central government, does he agree that it's time to rethink and keep services here at St Helier? And does he share my concern at the recent proposals to strip St Helier Hospital of inpatient kidney services, moving them to St George's Hospital, where we know that the CQC has already said the site is too full?
Yeah, I'd like to thank Councillor Dollimore for her supplementary and congratulate her on the hard work that she does in her wards, where it is very clear that the disadvantage that already existed even before COVID in terms of health outcomes has only increased. And yet the government's response to a widening health inequalities issue is to take services away from those who need it the most.
Point of order. We've got a time limit here for questions, and he's just making a big old statement. Same old statement we'll hear time and time again. You know, it was this group that unblocked £500 million of investment.
Can we
answer the question and allow other councillors the opportunity to speak?
Can you, as my teacher used to say, it's your own time you're wasting.
Right.
The Conservative government are taking away support for the most disadvantaged people in our communities with the greatest health
Conservative government is investing £500 million.
He himself has used a figure that is already out of date because the government has even taken away £150 million of the money that he says that they have been given. It is a disgrace that this is happening. The government should review the situation based on actual health outcomes now after COVID.
The doctors are the ones making the discussion.
Can I move on to Councillor Fairclough, please?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the Cabinet Member for his reply, although I must admit that the 5 lines of the reply are equivalent to a blank stare at a blank page. My question to the Cabinet Member is, you reference the meeting on the 2nd of September, but of course, Councillor Draper was appointed at the July full council. Now, Councillor Draper told us on the 2nd of September meeting that he hadn't met with you on the issue of Tenants Champion, although you did manage a panicked phone call to him between the reserved meeting business. My question to you is, what exactly would you consider a resigning matter in this issue? Thank you.
Well, frankly, I think it's about sorting out the issues that do exist. I'd like to thank Councillor Draper for undertaking that role. We're in the process of finalising its roles and responsibilities and actually getting on with things rather than some of these questions that you raised, Councillor Fairclough. It is important that tenants' issues are followed up, and I look forward to working closely with Councillor Draper on this matter. Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for his response. I would ask what reassurances he can give residents on low incomes in the borough that regardless of the constant uncertainty of financial support we see from the government and more than 10 years of austerity, that we won't pass that uncertainty on to those residents that are so vulnerable.
Well, can I thank Councillor Butler for his question and for his supplementary question? As he rightly says, the government in recent years has sought to push the burden on funding adult social care onto local authorities through the adult social care precept and ultimately onto our residents. And they've also forced local authorities to raise council tax by assuming it in the funding allocations that they give us. And it's very disappointing that in the announcement made around adult social care funding, it would appear that that approach has not changed, and they are still assuming that we will continue to raise monies through the precept and through council tax, and that ultimately will be on top of the increase to national insurance. I'm very pleased to tell him that the council does still have the council tax support scheme, which supports those residents on lower incomes to pay their council tax. We saw unprecedented demand on that scheme last year throughout the pandemic. Merton is one of the very few local authorities to retain that scheme following the government scrapping its support a number of years ago, and we have absolutely no plans to get rid of it.
Mr.
Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I'm surprised that the Cabinet Member would raise as an example of his own success the most terrible deal with Clarion, which is likely to have cost our borough tens of millions of pounds in money for regeneration. And if the Cabinet Member is taking regeneration so seriously, then please can you tell this chamber, Mr. Mayor, which councillor holds the position of Morden champion that was passed in the motion in this chamber in February, and why has he not informed the council of this?
I think obviously in terms of the Morden champion, I haven't got the details with me now, but I will say obviously in relation to Councillors Gretton's comment, we actually want to get on and deliver the regeneration of those estates in what is a very complex deal. The Tories may be opposed to the regeneration, which clearly they are, but we believe that people live decent standards of housing. But you don't want to get it done, and we know that. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I've just been reminded of something in the standing orders, which is a power that I didn't realise that I had. If I stand up, everyone has to sit down and stop talking. So I hope that I don't have to invoke that power, if that is the right word to use. But so please, can we let, even if we disagree with the answers that are being given, can we let the answers be given, and can we hear the questions that are being asked? Thank you. Councillor Henry.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to congratulate the Cabinet member on her new role and thank her for her answer. Would the Cabinet member agree with me that it is vital to create professional opportunities for young people by supporting apprenticeship programs?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That wasn't the name I had on my paper, but nevertheless, it doesn't matter. I'd like to thank Councillor Henry for her questions and also for the supplementary question. I would wholeheartedly agree with you for the importance of creating professional opportunities for our young people. Supporting apprenticeship programs is vital, as not all students are able or even wish to go to university. Having said that, you can, which as an apprentice, study up from level 2 to 7 and have lots of GCSEs if you so wish. However, the people who tend to be apprenticeship or go into apprenticeship can earn as they go, and they most times are offered jobs as they get to the end of their training. So with that in mind, yes, I do support the fact that students don't always want to go onto A levels and then to university straight away. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, a simple no would have actually been a perfectly adequate answer to my question. The Cabinet member hasn't met with Thames Water and the Environment Agency. Will he give a commitment that he will actually meet with them so we can have a joined up approach to the flooding problems in the borough? And he can also talk about the need to change the regulatory structure which Thames Water works under. Thank you.
I'd like to thank Councillor McGrath for his supplementary answer. I can update him as that we are in the process of arranging a meeting. We just need to find a date, but I would like to take this opportunity of thanking all the work of Merton Council officers who dealt with flooding issues in the borough. And I'd also like to add that a number of meetings have taken place with Thames Water to identify the issues across Merton. It's clear that the regulatory framework needs to be tougher in terms of Thames Water. I think they've systematically failed to do the repairs for sewers over a number of years, and it's quite clear that more work needs to be done for that, and that I think it's time that the government do take action in terms of Thames Water, and that they do have a tougher regulatory framework. So thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I thank the Cabinet member for her response, but much of the problem with flooding stems from Labour's failure to enforce the contract with Veolia. So will the Cabinet member follow this up with Veolia, and will she attend the Sustainable Communities Scrutiny panel on the 1st of November to provide an update on when Veolia will have cleared all the gullies and drains in the borough?
I thank Councillor Holden for his question and his supplementary. I will come to the Stable Communities panel because I'm due to come anyway to discuss issues around Veolia, so I'll be more than happy to come along. And I will commit to updating you into where they are within their programme of the regular gully cleansing, and also how many of the high-risk areas have had the sensors pinged in recent months.
Councillor Chung, are you online? Okay. Did you have advance notice of the supplementary, Councillor Welcome?
No, I don't have advance notice of the supplementary.
Okay. Thank you. That concludes the questions to the cabinet from members. I understand there was one question that I need to come back to that was misdirected, and we need to cover that in the next part. Is that correct? Yes. Okay, we are now going to move to the strategic theme main report, which is about children and young people with a focus on dedicated schools grants. I'm going to invite a cabinet member to present and then seek a seconder. We will then take councillors' questions to cabinet members on the strategic theme. After that, we will take the strategic motions and vote on them. I will then invite members that wish to speak on the main report to do so. Finally, we will then vote on the main report. Councillor Stringer, please present the strategic theme report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just to be clear, am I doing the full presentation and then we're doing questions afterwards? Okay, that's absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's been a tough 18 months for schools, and I'd like to begin by thanking all of you involved in educating children for everything you've done. I'd also like to thank the Prime Minister for realising that schools have coped amazingly well in spite of, not because of, his Secretary of State's efforts. Bye-bye, Gavin. Mr. Mayor, I'm proud of the outcomes that we achieve in Merton for young people. But while we often loudly celebrate achievements like amazing results for top GCSE grades, education isn't just about that. It's about ensuring that every child and young person, no matter what their needs, can grow to a successful, happy and independent adult. For some children, those with physical disabilities, learning disabilities or other special needs, this requires much more work. Mr. Mayor, we are passionately committed to give these children the education they need to thrive. The high needs block of the dedicated schools grant exists to fund local authorities and schools' education and health responsibilities to these pupils. But what this government did was turn these responsibilities into stronger and more wide-reaching legal obligations and increase the age range of people that are entitled to them at a time when the complexity of needs is also growing. Mr. Mayor, it does not take a top grade student to work out that if you increase the number of young people you're working with and increase the rights that families have to certain educational establishments, the costs are going to skyrocket. Clearly, the government didn't do its homework because they expanded provision without expanding the funding. It's therefore no surprise that 90% of councils across the country are suffering from overspends. We're now in a situation of nearly 2,500 Merton children with education, health and care plans. And while over 40% of these are in mainstream state schools, a growing number are educating in special schools, with large growth going to the independent sector. And this is not an easy problem to solve. We could try, like other local authorities have, to solve it by battling with parents, resulting in lots of tribunals, families distraught at the care they get and how they are treated. We have not gone down that route. Mr. Mayor, instead, we have been increasing the services for our children. Over the past 5 years, we delivered an additional 162 special school places, 80 more on the way. We invested in our staffing and are reviewing how we work with and fund mainstream and special schools to deliver the support as efficiently as possible. We're scrutinising the costs we pay for independent services. We're working to further improve early intervention for children with additional needs to avoid these needs escalating to requiring intensive support. Mr. Mayor, we are willing to do the hard work needed to bring our spending in line with income, but we will not do so in a way that will hurt families and children, and we will not do so so we need more funding to make that happen. Mr. Mayor, the second part of the paper deals with school funding more broadly. Schools are almost wholly funded on a per pupil basis. Meanwhile, their costs are almost wholly spent on school staff. Many of you around the room are governors and will know all too well that even small changes in pupil numbers are problematic. If you're a two-form school used to 60 kids a year and you're paying 2 teachers' salary, even 10% fewer children than you expected results in overspend because your costs haven't decreased. Until a few years ago, the challenge for us was surge in demand, and we worked quickly to expand provision, and for many years our schools were full to bursting. However, Mr. Mayor, populations change. Again, this is not a Merton issue. Schools across the city are experiencing a sharp decline in pupil numbers. The context is even harder now, given school funding is so tight. This isn't me, a Labour politician, saying this. This is the Institute for Fiscal Studies in a new report last week concluding that per pupil spending is down 9% in real terms in the past decade. So, Mr. Mayor, the problem is declining funding and declining pupil numbers. And again, there are no easy answers. And with a high proportion of our schools being local authority and the fact that we invest in excellent school improvement team with strong relationships with our schools, we are fortunately in a good place to work through these challenges together collaboratively. This doesn't mean that there won't be tricky decisions to make for individual schools, but I trust our schools with the support of our excellent officers to handle this well. Therefore, Mr. Mayor, we will not be supporting the Lib Dem amendment, which seeks to control how schools manage their budgets, restricting the options available to them. I commend this report and would like to thank everyone here who's involved in supporting schools for the work that they do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
This is being seconded by Councillor Makin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If the government funded schools properly and recognised the problems they're having balancing budgets, we wouldn't be having this debate now. On current performance, I wouldn't believe them if they did. Alas, this is not the case. Over the last couple of years, government have instructed schools to give staff a rise far greater than the increase in the DSG. They give with one hand and take away more with the other. Where do they think the money comes from? The biggest expense at school is obviously staffing and then premises. The amount of money in a school budget to be used for teaching resources, etc., is tiny. How can we expect to educate our young people if schools are always struggling with resources? Schools are also expected to pay an apprentice levy on their allocation. Again, in order to benefit from this levy, the schools need to invest time in training someone. Of course, they haven't got time to do that. Mr. Mayor, I support this report. Thank you.
We will now take councillors' questions on the strategic theme and then continue with the debate. Firstly, Councillor Curtin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, the Cabinet Member, for her response. Can the Cabinet Member reassure me that she will keep a close eye on the worrying increase in mental health issues in our children so that we can all do our best to support them? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for a supplementary question. And yes, this is an absolute priority, both for me as a Cabinet Member, for the officers I speak to, and also when I speak to health partners. We're all aware that the increase in mental health problems in young people, both at the kind of prevention end of young people beginning to feel anxious and beginning to feel stressed because of the change in the context, but also at the harder end, the increase of young people in hospital, in inpatient beds with eating disorders, with suicidal ideation is incredibly worrying. And we all need to work together as partners, as health partners and services, but also as a society to do everything we can to help these young people. And of course, it will be a priority for me.
Councillor Ormerod.
Thank the Cabinet Member for her answer. However, as the demand for places rose, the Council continued with few expansions of existing schools, which clearly failed to meet the rising demand. The large-scale in-authority provision expansion that was necessary to meet the needs of EHCP children has only recently happened. Does the Cabinet Member regret that this has taken so long to meet the rising demand within the borough that was identified over 6 years ago?
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Councillor for her question and for her supplementary. And do I regret that it takes a long time to open schools? Of course I do. Do I think this is due to any inaction on our part? Not in the slightest. We have worked as quickly as we can, using all the avenues that we can to make sure that we can expand provision in a way which is works with the strong special schools that we've already got, brings new provision in where it's needed, and makes the best use of the estate that we have. We all know here, and anyone who's been involved in schools, how long it takes to kind of open a brand new school, which is why we've gone down the route wherever possible of expanding our successful or existing special schools. And we've been doing this as quickly as we possibly can. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet Member for her reply. What mechanisms are in? Sorry, I'm so used to wearing it, I forget I've got it on. What mechanisms are in place to support our schools in the case of any future lockdowns? As under this government, we have to expect anything.
Thank you, Councillor, and thank you for your supplementary. There's a number of mechanisms in place. I've already referenced our amazing school improvement team who have really strong one-to-one relationships with each of our schools and meet with them regularly to know exactly what's going on. Our public health team in Merton have been absolutely extraordinary with helping schools to understand the never-changing guidance and regulations that they've been expected to follow. I am hopeful that the new Education Secretary, having been previously vaccine minister, will bring some of that knowledge and thoughtfulness to any changes that do happen from the central government from now on. That would make it our job vastly easier in supporting schools with any new restrictions that need to be put in place.
I thank the Cabinet member for her answer. It is clear that had this administration taken action to increase in-authority provision by the scale that was necessary, it would have reduced the cost of independent provision. Why did you not prioritise increasing in-authority provision when you became Cabinet member?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you for your supplementary. I'm finding it very funny that this is the party who were opposing us when we were trying to build the one new school that we have successfully built, working with Harris Academy, and now telling me that we should have magically found lots of land and opened lots of brand new schools all over the borough. I look forward to your support next time that we do need to do that. We have, as I said earlier, been working as efficiently and as effectively as possible to expand the quantity of provision without any compromise on the quality. That's why we've worked with the partners that we've already known, rather than trying to bring in any new free schools or academies. Thank you.
I'd like to thank the Cabinet member for her response. Thank you very much. Could I like to ask for Merton to pledge to be a communication accessible council accredited by Communication Access UK to train staff, councillors and adhere to the standards to be placed on a national directory displaying the communication access symbol. This is a free programme and provides training and standards on how to support people with communication difficulties. Communication Access UK is an initiative developed in partnership by charities and organisations that share a vision to improve the lives of people with communication difficulties, led by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists.
Ken, is there a question in there? Yes.
Thank you, Councillor. I think the question was, would we commit to take this pledge? I'm very, very happy to look at this and to see if it is something that is appropriate for us to do. As I say in my answer, we already do a lot around communication. We already work a lot with the provision that is available. A large number of our schools, for example, are taking part in the Nuffield Early Language Intervention, which is kind of evidence-based speech and language programmes. But I'm always happy to find out about new initiatives, and we'll happily meet with you, Councillor Gould, about this one.
Thank you. Councillor Dehaney. You've got a microphone coming.
Thank you. I thank the Cabinet member for her response to my question. I was interested to read about the funding of additional summer scheme sessions. Can you please tell me how they increase engagement with young people and hopefully turn them away from crime?
I'd like to thank the Councillor and for his question and for his supplementary. And yeah, I'm really proud of the work that we did over the summer, and we reached thousands of children Your question was about the way in that distracts and engages young people, and I just use the word, I think you asked me how engaged young people. The theory is that it distracts young people and helps them do something fulfilling, and that therefore makes any kind of involvement with criminal activity just less available to them. There's some evidence from the youth work world that where youth services and youth work provision has been cut, there's been increases in crime. And so part of what we're doing with our kind of summer activities is trying to put back in place some of that provision and services that we think is so important to children and young people.
Adam Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I start by thanking the Cabinet member for her response? Since the Cabinet member made this a priority, the overspend has risen by £10 million. Why did your department not respond to you making DSG a priority? Thank you.
I'd like to make a couple of, thank you, Councillor, for your question, for your supplementary. I'd like to make a couple of points. Firstly, I don't know how much you guys know about schools. Children tend to go to them for a long time. So if a child is at an independent school and you've got that commitment to their place, I can't within 6 months whip them out of that school and take that money without huge disruption to the education. Turning this around and the work that we're doing on the DSG is going to be a really difficult job, and it's going to take a long amount of time because we need to start to change where peoples are going. We start to bring in this new provision that we've already been talking about. But what I was never going to do, as I said in my speech, was start to fight with parents and start to withdraw services at an inappropriate time for their children.
Thank you to the Cabinet Minister. When will plans be in place for support for disadvantaged pupils during the Christmas holidays?
I'd like to thank the Councillor for her question and her supplementary. So her question initially was about the summer programme, which I've already referenced and said I'm really proud of. As it happens, cycling over here, I bumped into one of the local head teachers who provided this in his primary school, and he was talking about how happy his staff were to come in over the summer and put on this additional provision, and how keen they would be to do something similar again in the future holidays. What we need to be able to do this is funding. We were able to get some funding because of the exceptional circumstances this year. The government did kind of finally step up. We need serious funding so that we can offer ongoing support over the holidays, every single holiday for every disadvantaged child who needs it. But I know that our schools will be up for that challenge if we can find a way to source the funding.
Mr. Mayor, thank you. And I thank the Cabinet member for her response to my question. And my supplementary question is to ask whether, given a projected near 37 million pound deficit, whether 175% increase in staff numbers covering this area, but a 12% reduction in the caseload for each of those staff members is as worrying to her as it is to me, given the overall deficit. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to thank the Councillor for his question and for his supplementary, and it does not worry me in the slightest. In fact, I think we need to do as much work as possible with these young people and their plans to make sure they're appropriate. The complexity of some of these cases is really significant. We need to be constantly looking at the provision for these young people and whether it's appropriate. That is the only way that we're going to be able to adjust the services and make sure that it is right for what that child and young person needs at that time. Thank you.
Stand. So can we, we'll now take motions on the strategic theme. Councillor Gould, I believe you're presenting a motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. We need to help Merton's children's voices be heard. And to do this, we need to improve support for speech and language therapy, making it easier and clearer to access services for parents with children with speech and language difficulties. We should be highlighting to the government the devastating knock-on effect the children that are underfunding of speech and language therapy will cause. There is a clear consensus that speech and language therapy improves the lives of children and young people with speech and language communication difficulties and for the lives of their family members and carers. We know how important early years education and socialisation are for children's lifelong learning. Unfortunately, following COVID, this has diminished for many young children. We also recognise the impact that communication problems can have on every aspect of life, with particular concern surrounding the long-term effects on young children. Previous research has shown that children with poor vocabulary skills are twice as likely to be unemployed when they grow up, and over 60% of children in young offender institutions have communication difficulties. In the report, Let's Talk, Access to Speech and Language Therapy, back in June 2019, before the pandemic, the Children's Commissioner shone a light on spending on speech and language therapy services. The report revealed a postcode lottery of spending with huge variations across different areas. The risks children waiting months to be seen or never receiving support at all, with nearly 1 in 5 children starting school lacking the expected communication skills. With particular concern is the accessibility of services on Merton's website. The web page for speech and language support appear unconnected and difficult to navigate. The information could be made clearer and easier to understand, and more advice for parents, particularly in the early years, on what they can do to make a difference for their child's speech and language. Indeed, information for resources online supplied following my priority question earlier could not be found on Merton's web pages. Although speech and language therapy was continued for some online during COVID, as outlined in the recent survey by the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists, positive experiences were not shared by all. We call on key decision makers and local leaders, including NHS, the CCG and schools, to come together to raise the importance of speech and language and communication and make a commitment to work together to provide the support needed in the context of COVID pandemic to avoid those needing support falling through the gaps. Also, to look at improvements with help for dyslexia following the noted significant number of dyslexia assessments now being undertaken, as we read in tonight's report. Provide additional help making available dyslexia-friendly books in libraries, basic skills materials, and this support networks on Merton's website. With the increase in demand for speech and language therapy services, we need a guarantee that those who develop a higher level of need due to delays in identification and reduced support during the pandemic will be supported. The inequality of high needs funding is massively impacting on schools' ability to provide the vital resources to support our SEND children, particularly those with speech and language difficulties. Merton needs to lobby central government to address the crisis in provision of speech and language therapy, and write to the Secretary of State for Health and Social Care, asking him to do just this. I hope you will help the voices of Merton's children be heard and support this motion tonight. Thank you.
By Councillor Bakari. Councillor Bakari, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I actually started my journey into politics because my son has speech and language challenges. After years in the teaching profession, I knew that my son needed specific help, but his Merton school didn't have the funding, and they did try, but they didn't have the resources. Now, there's a very complicated system, which was referred to by Councillor Gould, which is very difficult to navigate, even for an experienced teacher. So imagine what it's like for most parents. Now, there's some results from the Merton's Big Conversation, and it says that most young people and families, 60%, felt uninformed about the support that's available. So this is an issue. Early intervention is the key to supporting children with special needs, and any parent or teacher can tell you that there's a domino effect when your child has not had its needs met and confidence and abilities affected. That's why I joined the Fair Funding for All Schools campaign, and later on joined the Liberal Democrats, because in my opinion, they did have the best policies in this particular area. We all become councillors for different reasons, and I did because I wanted to represent and speak for those who literally have no voice, the children that we are talking about. Now, the Royal College of Speech and Language Therapists have found that COVID has increased the challenges before COVID, things were pretty challenging. I managed to get my son to have some NHS paid NHS therapy, only to be told that he wasn't severe enough. Now that's the issue. There's a gap here where there are children who are just not bad enough to get the help that they need. Now I had to pay £60 for an hour of support. Now, no, I couldn't afford that. I managed to do a couple sessions, but not enough. And that's what the problem is for parents. They can't afford the need to help their children. Now, I look at the amendment that the Labour Party have made, and they're saying they're going to continue the work. There's no radical or progressive change here. And what we're asking is just to take those next steps forward. You've said that you will look into the pledge. That's actually something that we're asking you to do. So it's a bit of a challenge for us to accept the amendments because it actually hasn't changed anything. And that's the problem. We need to have some change. Since COVID, the RCSLT have found that 62% of children and young people did not receive the speech and language therapy during lockdown. And despite the fact that you've said it's online and it's there for them, it's too difficult to access. And I'm afraid that is why we must do more. Building Back Better is a report that's written by the group, and they're urging the government to do more as well, and the councils, and to make sure that it's essential to the education recovery plans to fund speech and language therapy services appropriately. So we urge the council leader to push further to get the support needed for our children. The former education secretary was, quite frankly, a bit of a disappointment. I think some members here might agree. So let's hope for a fresh start with a replacement that hopefully the Education Secretary will be looking into this further. And with your support, we can urge the government for more increased funding in this area, in an area that has been ignored and forgotten by the council and by our government. Thank you.
Marbush.
Mr. Mayor, we're used to the Lib Dems bring emotions to this chamber that are not worthy of debate. On an initial glance of this motion, it is evident that this is worthy of debate. However, once again, the Lib Dems do not disappoint and have got it all wrong. They plead to us all on numerous occasions not to play party politics. Yet, this motion is riddled with political point scoring rather than focusing on what really matters. The motion refers to shortfalls in funding from central government. However, we have been clearly increasing resources for some time, especially during the pandemic. This is demonstrated by the government funding, £18 million in November 2018 to help disadvantaged children with speech and language issues, £24 million in February 2019 for 1,000 health visitors to work in deprived communities to help bridge the word gap to identify speech, language and communication needs early on, with Andy Burnham himself saying this announcement is good news for Greater Manchester and good news for our children and families. £1 billion COVID catch-up fund in June 2020 with £650 million to help with missed learning and £350 million for our national tutoring programme to provide support to those who most need it. £700 million in February 2021 to fund the recovery premium package to focus on one-to-one and small group tutoring programmes, with the fund established to help disadvantaged pupils and with those with special needs. And lastly, £1.4 billion in June 2021 to fund 100 million tutoring hours, with 153 million of this to help train early year practitioners to focus on speech and language development. Mr. Mayor, this is an investment of £3.4 billion over 3 years by this Tory government, which highlights our clear record of increasing resources for speech and language therapy. Had the Lib Dems chose not to score political points and focus on what really matters to our residents, we would have supported this motion. However, they chose to play political football and have clearly scored an own goal yet again tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have an amendment. Councillor Stringer, please move your amendment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. As with many motions from the Lib Dems, I commend and agree with lots of the underlying principles of what it's trying to say. Speech and language is completely vital, and investment in speech and language is vital. Ensuring that children are able to communicate is a huge predictor of how well they do later on in their education or their wider life. It's just that the current motion doesn't reflect exactly how things work, which has led to some misunderstandings. That's why we needed to propose some amendments. So the motion is right that there is a shortage in speech and language therapists. But again, this is a national issue, and it is a national issue still linked to funding, unfortunately, Councillor Bush. You're also right that the motion is also right to talk about how COVID has affected and interrupted speech and language therapy. Of course it has, like many of our other therapies that have been given to our children and young people, but that is all being addressed now, and there is additional support being put in place. The motion is also right that some parents in schools do feel it's difficult to access speech and language support. And Councillor Bakari, thank you for sharing your story. As the quote in the amendment shows, this does not actually reflect what Ofsted and the CQC found when they came and reviewed our special educational needs services. And as we have also put in our amendment, we are open to always improving how we communicate with children and families. But the current motion misses the recommendation from all research on language, which is that wherever possible, issues should be picked up and addressed as early as possible and see if they can be resolved without specialist support. That's why we've amended it to make clear the school staff play a critical role in identifying and addressing speech and language issues. Of course they do. And obviously, where relevant, any specialist support should, of course, be central to a child's education, health and care plan. We've kept the recommendation to lobby for more specialist services and more funding. Councillor Bush just read out some exciting sounding numbers, exciting until you look at what the experts said was actually needed. So one of the final numbers he ended on was that £1.4 billion of additional tuition, whereas what the Education Recovery Disaster Kevin Collins was asking for was 15 billion. So it was less than 10% of what they thought was needed as what was provided. So we do want to continue to lobby for more services, not just for language, but more broadly for children with special educational needs. But we do thank the Lib Dem group for their interest in this issue. And as I said earlier, happy to speak to you about the particular pledge, and we hope that you will support our amendment. Thank you.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Draper. Do you wish to speak now, or is it all right?
I would like to speak now, if I may, if that's okay. Right, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. Merton has an outstanding reputation for teaching children with additional needs. I know, because I've been a governor at Cricket Green School for nearly 30 years. I know I don't look it. And I've seen it become one of the most respected special schools in the whole country. And it provides services to mainstream schools across Merton, and believe it or not, across London Borough of Sutton as well. And our speech and language strategy is at the core of what we do at that school. Now, again, I know, because believe it or not, my daughter is a speech and language therapist, and it's a tight, well-informed community, that all across this whole country, children with speech and language needs have been suffering over lockdown because you can't properly replace face-to-face with virtual speech and language teaching. That's been said by all the speakers. And yes, thanks to many speech factors, including, and largely including, government funding, there is a shortage of speech and language specialists throughout the country. But Merton is bringing it back. We are there, we are front and centre. We are working with parents, we are working with schools, we are training staff, we are lobbying government. We are good. Mr. Mayor, I second this amendment. Thank you very much.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Gould, do you wish to use your right of reply? Okay, the microphone's coming to you.
Thank you. But we can't be complacent, can we? We agree in the national issue with the funding. Thank you, Cabinet Member, for acknowledging this and agreeing that speech and language issues are a real problem. Merton Council can do better by agreeing with these improvements, and can always do more. We hear that the staff and resources, the staff, particularly availability of staff, is a difficulty with that, and the resources are getting worse. With the dwindling funding also is a real problem. I hope the council will take forward the further requests raised in tonight's motion to improve the life chances of Merton's children. In your amendment, you state Merton schools are well placed to identify any speech and language needs, and say you are taking opportunities to train staff and to improve their capabilities to identify need. Well, which one is it? I don't know. Which one? Our concerns need to be taken to central government, as we have heard in Councillor Bakari's speech tonight regarding the devastating underfunding of SEND and shortage of speech and language therapists. And thank you for agreeing to look at the pledge that the cabinet member has agreed to. Where are your expectations for improvements for provision? Don't Merton's young people deserve better? Are Merton Council standing up for the most vulnerable in our community following COVID, or sitting on their hands and letting them fail from the outset? Help Merton's children's voices get heard and give greater joined up support to speech and language therapy, making it easier to understand how to access services. We are asking Merton Council, following COVID, to stand up for the youngest members of our community and demand government improves funding for speech and language therapy.
Thank you.
Help Merton's children.
Thank you. That's the time. Thank you. I will now call for a vote on the amendments. I'll ask you to raise your hands. The members, raise your hands for the amendment. Right, okay, thank you. Against? Not voting. Thank you. The result of the vote is 28 for, 6 against, 20 not voting. So the amendment is carried. I now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Please, please can you indicate for? Against? Not voting. Then we have the result for the substantive motion 28, not voting 27, no votes against. That means that the amendment is, or the substantive motion is passed, and I can move on to the next item on the agenda. We now consider the strategic theme motion. Councillor Holmes, please present this motion.
Mr. Mayor, thank you very much. So, Mr. Mayor, Labour may not be worried about a £37 million deficit, but we are. Mr. Mayor, what Councillor Makin and the Cabinet member ignored is that overall schools are now better funded than they have ever been in their history. The government have increased the DSG by 3 billion, then 4 billion, then 7 billion. When the Cabinet member tells us about the number of authorities that are struggling, what she's not telling us is that that is over a 5-year period. It's not today. Other local authorities have gone down. We have gone up. So, Mr. Mayor, that's the full story. The point of this is that it's decisions that have been made by the administration, and the Cabinet member has acknowledged that this evening. The Cabinet member has told us that it is her decision not to pull young people out of a school that they're in, despite the fact that that's costing us in some cases 10, 20, 30,000 pounds. That's fine, that's leadership, that's the Cabinet member's decision. The Cabinet members also told us this evening that she's not worried about the fact that caseload work for our team members has dropped because there are complex cases. And again, that's fine. That's leadership, Mr. Mayor, and the cabinet member is entitled to make that decision. But Mr. Mayor, that's why we've got this problem. That's why we've got a £37 million deficit, not because of the government, but because of your own decisions and because of decisions that you yourselves have made. The statistics are in the report that's been presented to us tonight. The number of young people with EHCPs in our maintained schools are down from 49% to 42%. Independent and non-maintained provision up from 12% to 16%. And provision in our special schools down from 33% to 23% in terms of the numbers who attend. That's the issue. It's in your own report. That's where the problem lies. Now, there are three excuses, Mr. Mayor, that are normally given. These are the usual defences. We didn't know. There's nothing we can do about it, and it's the government's fault. Well, you did know, because it's been tracked for 4 years, 5 years even. So you did know. There is something that you could do about it because belatedly you did it. You've actually addressed Lavender and Watley. And thirdly, it's not the government's fault. They're your decisions. And we've heard that tonight from the cabinet member herself. So, Mr. Mayor, what do we do about this? What do we do about this? Do we call on the cabinet member to resign or the leader of the council to resign? Well, that doesn't seem right to me because actually they're the ones who showed some political courage in getting it sorted. The problem, Mr. Mayor, is not two individuals, but the whole Labour group. Half of you had to be dragged, kicking, screaming and plotting to sort this out. Half of you thought £37 million deficit was okay. Half of you thought that to put the most vulnerable children in the borough into poor provision or home provision was okay. Well, it's not okay. It's not okay for us, and it shouldn't be okay for you. So perhaps those members are the ones that should resign, but we'll let the electorate decide that. But let's carry on further, Mr. Mayor. What lies behind this? The Member of Parliament for Mitcham and Morden, who has tried to sabotage this policy from the beginning, and who, together with some of you, seems happy to have a £37 million deficit. So, Mr. Mayor, the reason we brought this forward tonight is that the administration can't be trusted with this issue. And therefore, we do need to have a cross-party panel to look at it. We need head teacher involvement. We might even need external financial involvement, because what we can't do is carrying on running a deficit at this level. It's clear to us, and it should be clear to you. That's why we're moving this motion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
This is being seconded by Councillor Ormerod. Councillor Ormerod, do you wish to speak now or reserve your right?
I think Councillor Holmes is reserving his right. Is that right?
No, he has the right to reply.
The right to reply. Sorry, I'm getting confused. I'll
You
speak now.
now.
Sorry. It's that long since I've been in here now. It's just, I do apologise. Oh, I told you. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Over my tenure since becoming a councillor and sitting on the first CYP panel and then becoming deputy chair, I've been part of numerous conversations, mainly directing questions with both directors of CYP, the cabinet member plus the finance team. That's the previous cabinet member as well, the previous director too, I should say. Whenever raising questions about DSG, its current deficits and what was being done about it, I always got the same response, which would be, we're waiting to hear from the Department for Education. And numerous times I would ask, well, when will you hear something? What are you actually waiting for? Alas, this comes to light as the deficit has grown year on year by this council as a result of not understanding what the council will be entitled to begin with. It's a great day today for us all to be sat in this chamber where we all should be talking and addressing local politics, as in those politics which we can make a difference. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. And my fear would be that the council on this occasion, yet again, would place the blame on the government rather than addressing this subject, the topic of a significant deficit. Because it would be, oh, I'm not to blame. It's not us. It must be the government's fault. And that is precisely what has happened this evening. Well, what about the councils that didn't go into deficit? What did they do differently? What I would love to hear is somebody, anybody, I don't mind who it is, to address the fact that somewhere, somebody or persons have got it wrong within this council. A council has a duty to interpret legislation at a local level based on what you can realistically achieve within your own envelope. That is what businesses do. They don't spend and then wait for a fairy godmother to come and put it right. Yes, I'm aware it is being sorted out now. We actually, as a Conservative group, put forward a motion 2 years ago, back in 2019, which was to maintain Watley Avenue as a school. That was actually voted down by this Labour administration because they wanted to turn the site into housing. So things are starting to move now, but why didn't it start sooner? Why wait? Why grow more debt, more and more? I would actually like to thank the new Chief Executive for steering the officers for a right course of action and finally addressing the situation. But I'd also like to know and have a review of what has happened between then and now from a local council perspective in order to be able to learn and do things differently going forward. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have an amendment. Councillor Stringer, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This motion shows a complete lack of understanding of the drivers of the problem. As I said in my speech in the main report, the increase in spending due to the additional responsibilities surprised no one. And it is, I'm sorry to say it, the government's fault that they haven't done anything to address that. The increase in the complexity of needs of children and young people was less expected, but again, the idea that this is somehow our mismanagement is simply not backed up by evidence. Our most recent inspection by Ofsted and the CQC did not provide any evidence that our assessments of pupils are overly generous. The idea that we've been waiting, as we've just heard, is completely refutable. We've been publishing plans on how we're dealing with the DSG and have been executing those plans. It just does seem that no one here, or at least from the other side, has been reading them. Mr. Mayor, stepping back, the idea that this is a case of a Labour-run council mismanaging its funding can be, again, easily refuted by the fact that almost 90% of councils are overspent on their high needs block. Let me take a moment to list some of the other councils experiencing some of the highest overspends on their high needs education. Firstly, Surrey County Council. Does anyone here know which party runs that? That's right, it's the Tories since the 1960s. Kent County Council. Kent County Council, is that run by Labour? That's Tories, that's Tories. So I'd very much like to see Councillor Holmes call up the leaders of those local authorities and tell them that they're mismanaging their budgets. You may argue that they are large county councils. Okay, let's look at some of the smaller authorities that have already had safety valve conversations with the Department for Education, like the one that we're now involved in, due to their increasing overspends. Let's look at a couple of those. Richmond Council, is that Labour run? No, our friends at the back are proud of its Lib Dem connections. Kingston Council, similarly, not Labour run. I am not here arguing that Labour councils are doing better. What I am saying, in the words of one Tory leader, is that we're all in this together. But Mr. Mayor, given these facts, it would be irrational to even consider a motion that tries to place the blame of the feet of this administration. The government knows it has messed up. It launched a national review of SEND funding back in 2019 in an admission that the current system isn't working. It launched it in 2019. Here we are at the tail end of 2021, and the review has been delayed and delayed. I just hope that the new Secretary of State, Nadine Zahawi, puts this long overdue SEND review at the top of his in tray. It is absolutely critical that the government comes up with a better funding system. It's critical to our most vulnerable children, but also so that we and local authorities across the country can have certainty about the impact of the DSG overspends on our other spending. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move our amendments to this motion.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Kenny.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I formally second this motion. Mr. Mayor, the Conservatives' motion shows a complete lack of understanding of the essential needs of the designated schools grant for local authority schools. The motion also shows a complete lack of understanding of the way in which schools financially being let down by the Conservative government. Perhaps this is one of the reasons which has led to Gavin Williamson being sacked this afternoon. Mr. Mayor, the demand of special educational need budget continues to grow. These children matter, their needs matter, the needs of their families and the school matter. Caring for and providing the best education for this group of children is vital, and due to the underfunding of this government, the schools and local authority are struggling. To provide for this group of children is what any caring and civilized country does. Schools do their very best. To do this costs money. Inadequate funding means that this group of children suffer. Is this what our opposition wants? Does it want Merton's children to suffer due to totally inadequate funding? What Merton Conservatives opposition should be doing is hammering on the government's cabinet doors, all of whom were educated in independent schools with charitable status, which state schools do not get. And I note that our new education minister was educated at King's College in Wimbledon, another member of the cabinet who does not know what it's like to be educated in state schools. State schools need every penny to provide an outstanding education to our children, especially those with special educational needs. They are part of our future. They are essential. They should be offered the very best of education. Margaret Thatcher will always be remembered as the milk snatcher. This government obviously wants to be remembered as the government who stole the education of the children with special educational needs. Merton's local authority and schools are dedicated to supporting children in every way they can. Go into schools, see how they struggle with such tight budgets, not just sitting on the governing body, but getting in there and actually watching what schools have been doing with children. Teachers do not give up on their pupils. They struggle for their pupils' benefit. They often use their own money to provide resources. Merton schools have a great reputation for the SEN they provide, despite inadequate funding. Mr. Mayor, this heartless motion should be ripped up and thrown in the bin. Shame on all of you for putting it forward.
Councillor Kohler.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The expanding dedicated schools grant deficit is a serious and potentially existential threat for this authority and many others, which is why Councillor McGrath and I have been focused on it during the FMTG scrutiny sessions. Consequently, be the first to congratulate Councillors Holmes and Ormerod on their perspicacity. However, have either of you talked to your Conservative colleagues? May I in particular refer you to Councillor Gretton's comments on FMTG last December, when he criticised the administration for using the DSG deficit to exaggerate the extent of Merton's financial woes. It's hard to believe, I know, and so when I sit down after this speech, I will tweet a link so you can hear Councillor Gretton in all his glory arguing that Merton should release any funds they were setting aside to cover the deficit. That's right, Councillor Gretton was arguing Merton should make no allowance for the DSG deficit simply because the government had issued a statutory instrument allowing authorities to post a negative balance on their balance sheet for the next 3 years in respects of DSG deficits. What happens after 3 years, we asked? Councillor Gretton had an answer. And I quote, "The government are going to address the issue, and there is no discussion anywhere, apart from in Merton, that there's going to be a large bill to pay in 3 years' time." Lord only knows where Councillor Gretton was getting this stuff. Perhaps he had a hotline to Gavin Williamson, although that went rather cold this afternoon. Put simply, the current Tory party, both locally and nationally, believes in nothing and says anything. 9 months ago, Councillor Gretton told us the DSG deficit was a mirage, and now Councillor Holmes and Ormerod raised this cynical motion. 2 months ago, Stephen Hammond told more than one of my constituents he would not support a decrease in the overseas aid budget, and then voted in favour of cutting it. And last week, our strong voice in Parliament told Times Radio that raising national insurance was one of the worst ways to address the shortfall in NHS and social care funding, and then silently crept through the lobby in support of that measure. But to return to the motion, it calls for a cross-party group to oversee the restructuring of the DSG. Well, no time like the present. This is a cross-party group, so why not tell us your bright idea, Councillors Holmes and Ormerod? Tell us the solution you have kept from us so far, or perhaps in reality you agree with Councillor Gretton. We will be supporting the Labour amendment.
Councillor Holmes, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So from Councillor Kenny, we heard a series of wording: suffering, struggling, heartless, shame. So in other words, you think we're right? Because what happens, Mr. Mayor, is that when Labour think we're right, they resort to that sort of language and nonsense of telling us we want children in the borough to suffer. I mean, really, what utter nonsense. And then Councillor Stringer, Cabinet Member, who I have great respect for, her defence seems to be, well, we may be wrong, but other authorities are wrong too. But Mr. Mayor, that's no defence. The crux of this is, are we happy with a £37 million deficit? We're not, and you've said tonight you are, and that's fine. That's what leadership's about, and you've said that you are happy with that, and we accept that. So, Councillor Kohler, let me address the points that you have made. Councillor Gretton's actually right. That what the government what authorities to do is make savings within the DSG. We haven't done that. We've set aside tens of millions of pounds against government advice in order to put this whole right. So other programmes will have to be stopped, cut or threatened. That's not what we're expected to do. What Councillor Gretton said was actually right. In terms of what our plans are, our plans have actually, despite what you say, our plans have been outlined over the course of the last few years. This is an issue. This is an issue that needs leadership. This is an issue that is not straightforward and simple. Some of the measures that are now being taken could have been taken years ago. That's what we would have done. And we would have looked at these things and we would have looked for savings at the time. The reason I'm able to say that is that the administration have said tonight, and that's your right, that that's not what you chose to do. What you chose to do was to continue to see the debt go up and up and up. So Councillor Kohler, you're wrong. We would have addressed it at the time. So Mr. Mayor, I actually think we're right tonight, and I really hope that we get this motion passed. Thank you.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Members, raise your hands for. Against? Not voting? Okay. The vote is 37 for, 17 against, 1 not voting. So the amendment is carried. I will now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Members, please indicate for. Please indicate for. Against? Not voting. Okay. The vote there is 37 for, 17 against, 1 not voting. So the substantive motion as amended is carried. We now move on to the debate on the strategic theme main report. I have the following listed to speak. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And can I thank the officers for preparing this report? I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank our head teachers and their colleagues who have worked so hard in this most trying of times. Mr. Mayor, we welcome the additional support the government is providing through the various grants as detailed in the report. What the Conservative group, however, does not welcome is the position that this council now finds itself in with regard to the dedicated school grant. For let's be clear, the only reason the DSG overspend is now being dealt with is because the DfE pulled the alarm cord along with the then interim Director for Children's Services. Time and time again, we were told by this Labour administration that the high needs block was being well managed. We all know now it was not. And the DfE agrees, as seen in their correspondence with Merton Council, noting that the authority had already increased local provision, but the number of expensive independent placements continued to increase, questioning the rationale of moving funding from the schools block to the high needs block, believing this has led to the growth in EHCPs, urging difficult discussions with schools in relation to top-up rates. Merton independent schools are the highest in the country, asking why Merton did not set out more strongly what is and can be made available locally. Damning comments that clearly state that this administration's implementation of policy has contributed to the deficit. Mr. Mayor, no one can question the good intent towards ensuring the best for Merton's children with special needs, but it is not good enough to just hope that government will just write you a blank check. And that is the recurring theme with this Labour administration, a naive belief that the government should just fund their political priorities. Tonight, they have highlighted the Watley Avenue. They have highlighted Lavender Nursery. As my colleague, Councillor Holmes, said, they had to be dragged kicking and screaming. They voted down the the Conservative motion to repurpose, keep this for housing. Half the Labour group voting against the measures, some even simply preferring a vote to next year's election. Mr. Mayor, after 11 years, the cost of labour is mounting. The dedicated school grants is 12.2 million and near overspend 37.5 deficit projected at the year end. Mayoral Development Company, 3 years, £2.1 million of cancelled taxpayer money and not a single house built. And now the Clarion Regeneration debacle, so costly that public scrutiny is being denied. Millions of pounds set aside or lost due to Merton Labour and bad decisions. Money that could have been spent on the better services for our residents or improving our town centres. But will any Labour politician take responsibility? Of course they won't. The truth, after Labour running Merton for 11 years, these are their failings. A decaying Labour administration with weak leadership whose only vision is to continue to take Merton residents for granted.
We have an amendment standing in the name of Councillor Fairclough. Councillor Fairclough, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to the officers for this report. Our amendment tonight to the recommendations on the report is a simple one. We're asking the local authority, as part of its strategy dealing with the drop in primary pupil admissions that's outlined in paragraph 8.4, to discourage larger class sizes for pupils in key stage 2 and above. I'm slightly disappointed to see that characterised as an attempt to control schools. In fact, it uses the language in the strategy in paragraph 8.4 of encouragement. So I'd hoped the administration would see it as it is, and maybe I can convince them of it, although I fear that's not the case. So why do we care about class sizes? Well, 2011 DfE research sums it up. The evidence based on the link between class size and attainment, taken as a whole, finds that a smaller class size has a positive impact on attainment and behaviour in the early years of school. And that's why we're doing this towards primary schools. And we need action here because we've got a particular local example of it, as you've seen from a number of public questions, that of Hillcross Primary, which is already announced in response to falling numbers, classes of 36 and 37 in year 6. Now, we understand from the answers to some of those questions, there's another 5 schools in a similar position already, perhaps. You get a sense of the council's response to this in the answers to those public questions. Hillcross School has a carefully worked out plan by the school that has the support of the council school improvement officers. Now, we're not convinced that's what parents think. One of those public questioners, Corinne Garrod, asked about the impact of larger class sizes on attainment. From the reply, no particular sort of local research has been done. Helpfully, my colleague Councillor Bakari will relate some of her direct experience on the impact of larger class sizes in due course. But I just wanted to emphasise what we're trying to do here is flag that we shouldn't be comfortable with the idea that class size changes are used to balance the books of schools, which is why I would urge you to back our amendment to the recommendations. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
The amendment's been seconded by Councillor Bakari. Do you wish to speak now?
Yes, thank you. As a teacher with experience of teaching classes under 30 and well over 30, I can tell you that large classes are incredibly detrimental to the learning of our children and progress. There will be less attention paid to children in large classes. And I found it a matter of behaviour management. That was what I had to deal with larger classes, which meant that I was not able to deal with special needs children, children who needed that extra support, even children suffering from anxiety or just wanting to have a chat. It really does put pressure on teachers. There's a higher likelihood of mental health issues, not just for the teachers, but also for the children and the parents. It's a real issue. And I am disappointed to hear the reluctance of even trying to make sure that classes don't go over 30. There is not any suggestion of us controlling. This is us trying to say, let's try and make sure this doesn't happen. A Labour government pushed for that actual number to make sure that classes didn't go over 30. And therefore a council like yourselves, run by people who are like-minded, should agree with us in this particular amendment. So I am utterly disappointed that you're not supporting this amendment, and it actually shocks me. I'm really disappointed. There's going to be a risk here of teachers who are not going to be replaced because there are funding issues, and the use of teaching assistants being taken as cheap labour in schools. And this is what's happening. We know it happens. I see it all the time with teaching assistant friends of mine who are made to take on large groups instead of actually teaching the children that they're there for, the children with special needs, for example, the children who need that extra support. Now, I really hope that you have a plan to make sure that this does not happen and that you're monitoring really carefully, because there is a massive risk here in Merton and we are slipping into that. And I think you need to acknowledge that and accept the amendment for what it is, which is a very, very clear indication of let's make sure we don't fall into this trap of classes of over 30. It is not anything controlling or determined in any other way than the fact that we are trying to make a suggestion here to support our children and support our schools and support our teachers. And I think, Councillor Stringer, you should be able to agree with that. Thank you.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor Stringer, do you wish to use your right of reply?
Just briefly. Thank you very much, Councillor Bakari and Councillor Fairclough for their amendment. It is about, we cannot start limiting schools' options and telling them what to do. The minute we start doing that, we are in completely playing the wrong role. In this particular circumstance, we have one school where the decision that they have made before going into deficit is to put the older year groups, not the youngest, the older year groups into classes that are over 30. I completely understand why parents and teachers have concerns about that, but the school are a good school. They've thought it through. They've made sure they got the right adults in the classroom. If we were to remove that as an option, what we're basically doing is encouraging them to just go into deficit. And then what happens is they start to cut absolutely everything else. And then they start to really struggle to continue to be a good school. And that's when you start to see parents choosing to take their children out. We've seen that happen elsewhere. We don't want that to happen here. You were right that the Labour government did try to reduce class sizes because there is some evidence about that association. To do that, you need to fund it. We as a local authority cannot start funding directly teachers in these schools. If I was to do that in this one school in a Wimbledon constituency, what would the Mitcham schools, who are having to make similarly difficult decisions about how to balance their budgets, would they come and say to me, well, hang on, we want you to fund this as well? We do not have that money. It does come back to money. does come back to money, and that the funding that Councillor Bush was listing earlier is not kind of generic school funding that they can use to supplement these type of decisions and additional teachers. It's all very, very restricted funding. So while we do, as we say in the report, work with schools to encourage them to keep to classes of 30 and ensure that reception groups and admission numbers are in multiples of 30, we cannot intervene on individual schools' decisions when they are making decisions that are entirely appropriate and accurate for their pupil population and for their staff. Thank you.
I'll now call for a vote on the amendment. Please raise your hand if for 4. Against? Not voting. For the amendment 26, against 28, not voting 1. So the amendment is lost. So we now vote on the original recommendations. Please, members, please indicate 4. Is that agreed? Okay, agreed. Thank you. We now move to motions on other matters other than the strategic theme. So item 8 is a Liberal Democrat motion. Councillor McGrath, please move the motion.
Mr. Mayor, I'm sure I don't need to say much about the seriousness of the climate emergency, an issue which every party, every mainstream party has accepted as a reality. We can see the threat not only in the scientific data, but increasingly on our streets, like the recent flooding in Rains Park caused by the once every 300 years rainfall. So the question is, Mr. Mayor, what can we do about it? Well, one thing we can do is we can stop financing fossil fuel companies. You may have seen, Mr. Mayor, that Ed Davey recently called for a stop to fossil fuel companies being able to raise funds in the City of London. Well, that's not within our power, but we do have the power to ensure that our pension fund does not invest in fossil fuel firms. There are 2 good reasons for doing that. The first is they're not good investments. You'll have seen possibly the quote from Mark Carney saying that the majority of the agreed reserves of oil and coal companies will have to stay in the ground. The second is to, of course, to live up to our own council's declaration of a climate emergency. So what's been agreed with this so far? Well, Mr. Mayor, so far the pension fund does have a plan to decarbonise its investments by 2050. Now, we don't think 2050 is good enough. It's quite something to be more lackadaisical than Boris Johnson's government in one's approach to climate change, but it appears that Labour Merton have actually managed it. I asked Mr. Mayor for a list of our pension fund fossil fuel investments. I'm not going to go through them all, but I was particularly struck by the presence of Whitehaven Coal. As you may know, that's Australia's leading producer of coal. What an extraordinary investment for a council committed to the climate emergency. Now, we don't think decarbonising our pension scheme by 2050 is good enough. So we want it done within 3 years. And I urge members to put the good of the planet even before their own party whips. Thank you very much.
Councillor Gould, I understand you're seconding the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Merton Council Pensions Committee should no longer give financial support to the polluting fossil fuel industry. As my colleague, Councillor McGrath, has already said, we declared a climate emergency back in 2019 and agreed burning fossil fuel poses a serious risk to the stability of the climate. Now, the latest IPCC report is code red for humanity, with the burning of fossil fuels warming the atmosphere, oceans and land. Pouring petrol on the flames of climate change needs to stop. The money invested now will affect the lives of generations to come and further decrease the chances of remaining below 1.5 degrees C ambition of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. When we remove the right pillars, we will see the end of this destructive fossil fuel era. The government needs to do more and fund a cleaner, greener economy. With COP26 in November, the science is clear. We are destroying the life support system of Earth. We need rapid cuts in carbon emissions. This Tory government is lacking in climate leadership, failing on its commitments to invest sustainably, refusing to ban new oil and gas exploration licenses. Merton Council has the power to ensure local workers not only have a pension for their retirement, but also a future worth retiring into. As we recover from the pandemic, we can choose to move away from old systems of investment that keep accelerating the climate crisis, and instead we can invest local money in ways that matter to local people and their future, creating jobs in the green economy. By shifting investments from dirty energy to clean energy, solar and wind power companies can expand, invest in research and development, and reach new markets. Fossil fuel investments are a risk for both investors and the planet, so we are calling on the Council to divest from these companies. Studies have shown maintaining fossil fuel investments can cause significant financial harm to pensions. Investing in fossil fuel companies is essentially voting for business as usual, a scenario that will lead to catastrophic climate change. In a future where forests perennially burn, water sources dry up, agricultural fails, heat waves proliferate, and extreme storms grow exponentially stronger, pension funds will be of little value then. It will be the turn of the councillors on the Pensions Committee to make this decision binding. In the end, we have to do the moral thing, and that's vote to divest from this reckless industry tonight. Thank you.
Councillor Barlow.
Mr. Mayor, not for the first time, in fact, for the second meeting in a row, we have a motion that's only purpose is to allow the Liberal Democrats to take credit for something that is already happening. The Pension Committee are already divesting from fossil fuels, but the Liberal Democrats do not have a place on that committee, so this does not provide copy for their leaflets or help with their rapid loss of votes to the Green Party. And Councillor Kohler has the brass neck to call a Conservative motion cynical. We have just 6 full council meetings a year, yet the Lib Dems continue to waste time that could be spent improving this borough. They are a national irrelevancy and they're becoming increasingly irrelevant to the lives of the people of Merton. Thank you.
We have an amendment. So we have an amendment. Councillor Attawar, please move your amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The Merton Pension Fund is a cross-party committee comprising of Labour, Tories and trade unions, all who passionately believe in responsible investment and are already doing the work being proposed by the Lib Dems tonight, which is why I am proposing Labour's amendment. Responsible investment is about taking into account environment, social and corporate governance factors when making an investment decisions and monitoring them. We also believe governance, social impact, and working conditions and human rights are also all equally important. Focusing on the extraction of fossil fuels on its own would not resolve the problems of climate change. So it is important it is not taken in isolation. We therefore look at everything we do and use in our everyday actions. For example, investment in steel and manufacturing, which can only be done using coke, would not be counted, and neither would the building and transporting of cars, which use the steel and energy from fossil fuels along the way. This is why we have chosen to calculate and analyze our portfolio's weighted average carbon intensity, measuring the direct and indirect greenhouse gas emissions of each company we invest in and weighting it in accordance with how much money we invest in it. As a result, we moved our funds out of high carbon emitting investments to less carbon emitting ones, while ensuring that their projected performance meets our financial needs and that we maintain a diverse and balanced portfolio. As of June this year, our measurable carbon footprint was 30% lower than it was the year before. The fund's weighted average carbon intensity has reduced by 60% from 219 to 87 between 2018 and 2021. This is 115 lower than the composite fund benchmark 202. The fund is taking the following steps: carrying out an annual carbon footprint analysis of our investment portfolios and continues to reduce exposure. All new investment decisions include carbon emission analysis, and any investment falling within red or amber categories are avoided. Making direct allocations to low carbon strategies, sustainable investments, and reducing our exposure to fossil fuels, 20 to 25% reduction achieved directly. Our ESG commitments are made clear in our investment strategy statement, which details our investment beliefs too. This can be found on our website. The fund has made significant progress over the last 24 months in evolving its policies on responsible investment and climate change. The fund is committed to increasing its allocation to sustainable and low carbon assets as a priority year on year and not 2015. While making good progress on our journey to becoming a fully sustainable investor, the fund's financial performance is strong and has made good progress. The fund is currently in surplus funding position with 103% funded. This helped to reduce the council's contribution from 19.4% to 17.6% from April 2021. So for these reasons, I propose we support this Labour amendment tonight and thank the Tories trade unions for their contribution in this work.
The amendment is being seconded by Councillor Pritchard.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm delighted to get the opportunity to speak on this issue because, as you know, I love pensions. And up until last autumn, I had the privilege of chairing the Pension Advisory Panel for 2.5 years. And the first thing we did on taking over as chair was set our priorities, which were fulfilling our pension liabilities, reducing taxpayers' contributions, saving money through collective investments, and putting environmental, social, and governance issues at the heart of our approach. These priorities overlapped and were approached concurrently, but in the first year, my personal focus was the decarbonisation strategy, as most people know. What followed was about 10 months of working with trade unions, officers, and the cross-party panel, and numerous policy and investment experts across London. The result was the implementation of a successful decarbonisation strategy that I reported on publicly in 2 consecutive annual reports and at full council. Over the period of my chairing, including the development and reporting of this strategy, I had dialogue with the Conservatives, Independents, even some local Green Party members on what I was doing and why, though never was I approached by the Liberal Democrats. So to remind them and everyone else of the 3 key reasons why I chose the strategy we did. First, we need to produce steel for everything from construction to electric railways, wind turbines, coastal energy generators, and nuclear power stations. Currently, the only way to produce steel in scalable quantities is to use coke, a fossil fuel. This will remain the case until the breakthrough we saw in Sweden this summer, where they successfully produced commercial quality steel using hydrogen, or initiatives similar to it is replicatable en masse. Second, many companies are involved in fossil fuel extraction, are also heavily involved in the development of renewals and hydrogen and carbon capture technologies, all of which we want to invest in. For example, Total Energies is expected to have greater renewable power capacity than clean energy leaders Iberdrola and Ørsted by 2030. We want to invest in these. Third, to be effective, decarbonisation strategies should look at the entire carbon footprint of their portfolio. There is no point just divesting from a fuel extractor if you pay no attention to the carbon footprint of your investments in a steel manufacturer, or the construction industry, which uses 50% of global steel, or the transport and vehicle manufacturing industry, which is used 16% of global steel, or the impact of logistical shipping or air freight and the carbon they produce. We must capture the full carbon footprint of what we invest in, lest we be like those who celebrate the carbon footprint of the UK whilst ignoring the fact that we outsource the most carbon intensive manufacturing to other countries, but still consume it here. That's false accounting, plain and simple. To put it simply, Mr. Mayor, this is a complex issue that required the kind of considered approach that Councillor Atwell has explained. And that is why, Mr. Mayor, that the Lib Dem motion is a perfect example of style over substance. They would laud a fund with a bigger carbon footprint than ours because it sets a tweetable target, whilst have us abandon a cross-party strategy which is seen as continuously decarbonise. That means the strategy, the target is for next year, not 2050, it's a year-on-year decarbonisation strategy, whilst increasing our investment in sustainables and renewables, and also meeting all our key objectives so that we don't have pension funds that are worth nothing, as Councillor Gold suggests. So, Mr. Mayor, I thank the Liberal Democrats for the 10 minutes they spent writing this strategy, but suggest we all stick to the decisions we made during the 10 months we took developing and implementing ours. I support this amendment.
If there are no further speakers, Councillor McGrath, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Judging by the frequency of the Tory attacks on the Lib Dems in this council meeting, the 628 vote majority is rather much on their mind. Let me just, I'm slightly puzzled by whether Labour members have actually read their own investment strategy, which says, I quote, decarbonise its investments so its investment portfolio reaches net zero carbon by 2050. Mr. Mayor, it's quite simple. We don't think that that's good enough. We think we should have no fossil fuel companies and be decarbonised in 3 years' time, not in 29 years' time. By the way, a coal company, a council committed to the climate emergency, owning a coal company, which does not much produce coal for steel making, it produces coal for use in power stations as well. That is not an appropriate investment for this council or any council that's serious about the climate, Mr. Mayor. So I ask members to vote for our amendment, our motion. Thank you.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Members, raise your hands for the amendment. Against? Not voting. The vote is 31 for, 6 against, 18 not voting. So the amendment is carried. I now call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Agreed. Agreed. Thank you. Not agreed. Okay. Those members, please indicate for the substantive motion as amended. Against? Not voting. Thank you. The vote is 31 for, 0 against, 24 not voting. So the substantive motion as amended is carried. Move on to item 9, notice of a motion, Conservative motion. Councillor Holden, please move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I move in this Conservative group motion calling on the administration to tackle the causes of flooding that are within its scope and powers. Repeated flooding has become a major concern to residents of Merton right across the borough, for which this Labour Council has been in denial for years, up until only very recently. Over recent times, this has occurred every year in parts of the borough, such as Rains Park, Cannon Hill, Dundonald and Hillside, due to heavy rain. Rivers and brooks have overflown in places like Colliers Wood and Lower Morden. The Lake Dam overflowed in Wimbledon Park. I've seen myself on my home in Hillside, near to the Lower Downs Road tunnel, that tunnel often ends up underwater. And recently it was under 0.5 metre of water in a July storm. Mr. Mayor, whilst undoubtedly there is a major role for Thames Water and the Environment Agency, it is for us in this place to look at actions that we as a council should be taking. On that basis, I welcome the report officers wrote on this matter when it came to the Sustainable Communities panel on the 2nd of September. And in particular, I would like to thank the 2 officers who wrote that report and our 2 flood risk engineers. They're very good and they respond diligently and quickly to councillors. However, the report was lacking in council actions and put too much emphasis on actions by external partners. Action should be taken more proactively here to avoid flooding events from repeating so often. And now that we're seeing so-called 1 in 30-year events happening annually. So therefore, we call on the council to make Veolia be held more accountable for cleaning the drains and gullies, to be more proactive inspections to see if any drains are blocked, regular updates to be provided to members and the public. And also the council should be wary of the false economy of cutting the drains clearing budget, a point that was well made by Councillor Howard in a budget speech some 10 years ago. One amusing excuse I've often heard before from the council and Veolia is that said drains can't be accessed due to parked cars. Now I find this quite a puzzling excuse, for is it not the case that this council is also the highway authority, the parking authority, the street cleaning authority, or whatever other authority you want to label it as? So therefore, it should not be beyond the wit of man for this council to coordinate those different council functions to ensure said parked cars are cleared out of the way temporarily and any other obstructions on any particular day that they need to do the works, and get the street cleaners in to unblock the drains, get Veolia in to clear the drains and gullies, and to remove any of the detritus that is blocking said drains, and not just allow the sweepings to be washed back in the next time it happens to rain. It's a request that I often hear from my residents in Hillside and elsewhere across Merton. So how hard can that be? Another cause of the recent flooding is a large amount of building sites and development that has happened over the borough, and a very large number of paving over green spaces. It is demonstrably true that if you build over every inch of grass, then rainfall will run off extremely quickly towards the drains and rivers. I do not see much evidence of any developments across the borough seeking to minimise or stop rainwater runoff from their sites. This is a failure of another council function, planning. Planning needs to be much stricter at requiring developments to contain sufficient sustainable urban drainage solutions and technology on its site and not just palm it off onto the public realm. No more excuses. Mr. Mayor, I think our motion tonight is fair and balanced and ask all the councillors to back it.
The motion is being seconded by Councillor Dean.
Formally second, Mr. Mayor. I've read the Labour changes to the Conservative motion tonight. As usual, Mr. Mayor, they absolve themselves of all responsibility of the flooding across Merton. Are they actually, Mr. Mayor, responsible for anything in this borough? It seems to me not. Now, local authorities shape the way people live, but sadly, this Labour council resembles the shape of a saggy balloon. It is their negative role in the recent flooding that is down to the fact they cannot complete the statutory task of cleaning the drains. Mr. Mayor, without maintenance, it's quite obvious that rainwater cannot navigate the clogged drains. Now, Merton has the equipment, it has the contractor, they have trained staff. Yet when it rains, the people of this borough seem to be underwater. After years of Labour ineptitude, Mr. Mayor, Merton is not managing their contractor, and their contractor is not managing the drains, and there is no scrutiny of that contractor, so there is no unblocking of drains. You can't be more clear than that, Mr. Mayor. So the failure of this simple task was obvious on the 12th of July and 2 subsequent dates, when torrential rain led to flooding, not a little local flooding, which Labour councillors stated in a public meeting that was televised, but dramatic torrents across a wide area of West Barnes, Rains Park, Lower Morden and Wimbledon, which led to numerous households being underwater. Now, I visited a dozen residents who were severely affected by those storms. Now, these are ordinary people. They live in Garth Road. in Abbott Avenue, in Coombe Lane, in Merton Hall Road, and they were flooded because they live in an area where the drains are blocked. Now, some of these people are still living in stinking, sodden homes, and it's going to cost them thousands of pounds to clean up, to recarpet and redecorate. And I don't think that is fair. And Mr. Mayor, the failure to clean drains is widespread across the whole of Wimbledon. Now, back in July, Councillor Gretton reported a number of drains that were blocked in Wimbledon Park. Now, since then, not one single drain has been cleaned. Yet in the contract with the contractor, they are meant to clean them within 3 days. I repeat, Mr. Mayor, that this Labour administration has no management when it comes to their contractor. They have no control, they have no scrutiny. So what's the solution, Mr. Mayor? Well, the first thing is we need this Labour Council to take the responsibility for the service that they are obliged to provide. Now, the second thing, contrary to the cabinet members that spoke tonight about powers, this council has plenty of powers. It's just they don't use them. Now, if they think that Thames Water is derelict in its duty in any way, it can initiate a Section 19 notice. It didn't do this. It didn't when it could have done. It should have done. But we also want the drain cleaning schedule published. We want the drains to be unblocked. And we'd like residents to know when their drains are being cleaned, because nobody knows and nobody sees these contractors. Now, residents demand more of their councillors, yet Labour councillors again are missing in action. We want ordinary people to be able to live in their homes without worry that they will be flooded at any moment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Fairclough.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, this motion is an odd one. It's not that we necessarily disagree with the idea of cleaning the gullies more regularly or holding Veolia to account more effectively. But to be honest, the way this motion is drafted, it's clear that it's just a desperate attempt to shoehorn blame onto the Labour Party in advance of the coming elections. Councillor Barlow was particularly concerned about this. Councillor Barlow, I give you Councillor Dean. It rather sums up the official opposition's approach generally. Now, I'm fairly sure it fails to meet the stringent criteria that Councillor Bembo claimed to require for before voting for a motion at our last council meeting, when he was trying to give his colleagues an excuse to sit on their hands instead of voting for a tenants champion. He said discussions with officers to work out how it would operate and an estimate of the cost were needed. So I'm slightly surprised to find that neither Councillor Holden nor Councillor Dean mentioned that. So I presume Councillor Bembo is in a difficult position. He can't vote for it. Fortunately, he's saved by a Labour Party amendment, so we won't get to vote on the motion. Turning to the Labour Party amendment, we might actually agree with the composite of both the amendment and the original motion, but sadly, they both counteract each other. The points we would like to make, Mr. Mayor, are twofold. The regular flooding we see is the climate emergency made visible. It highlights the need to take urgent action to combat the emergency rather than just sweep up afterwards. And that's the problem with the original motion. Secondly, the more serious challenge to mitigation and management of the impact is the requirements on water companies. Thames Water is very fond of telling us that they have to manage their assets to deal with once in 30-year events, and that we're witnessing once in 100-year events, leaving aside for the time being the logic of deciding what's a once in 100-year event solely by the amount of flooding that happens rather than how often it is actually happening. It's clear that the regulation is holding back the effective management of the situation we find ourselves in. Now, we know from the answer to Councillor McGrath's question earlier tonight, the cabinet member's got no real involvement here, and that's the problem with the Labour amendment. Puts all the blame on Thames Water, but isn't clear on how they're actually going to put any pressure on Thames. So resolving this is probably a job for the water companies, their regulators, and the government. And what we haven't heard tonight is anything about how either our Labour or Conservative colleagues are going to do that. Indeed, our Conservative colleagues should have access to the supposed strong voice for Wimbledon, that is the MP currently. Perhaps he can do something. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
We have an amendment. Councillor Irons, would you move your amendment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I have to say, I'm disappointed that our colleagues across the chamber have chosen to take quite a combative approach to this issue. Disappointed because where we should have collaboration, they've chosen division. Where there should be an acknowledgement of the progress the officers in this council have made, they have chosen ignorance. And where we should be taking the opportunity to work together to fight for a long-term solution to a long-term problem, they have chosen to focus on the wrong things in an attempt to benefit themselves in the short term. Am I supposed to take that? Because I don't think that's fair. I listened to him. Thank you. I'll continue. In short, once again, they have chosen to go low. Flooding in areas like Rains Park date back as far as the 19th century. Now, I am no cheerleader for Veolia, but they were not working in this borough then. They were not working in this borough in the summer of 2016 or the summer of 2017, when significant rainfall caused significant flooding. What's more, I find it odd that the Tories, who have spent a large portion of tonight's meeting trying to convince us of their superior fiscal responsibility, that they demand we use this council's time and our community's money to breach a contract based on assertions that are clearly so wrong, incorrect, and flawed. The truth is that they know it is this council that has stepped up and stepped in where Thames Water has failed to do so. It is this council that has installed gully sensors to monitor conditions in real time so that blockages can be removed quickly. It is this council that has done extensive CCTV investigations of Thames Water sewers, which has forced them to remove over 21 tons of silt from their blocked network. And it is this council that has challenged Thames Water over their disastrous way they handle reports of flooding. We agree that sustainable drainage solutions are vital to combat the continued threat of flooding. So it's pleasing to note that it is this council that has submitted 2 substantial bids to Thames Water for rain gardens in Rains Park and Wimbledon Park. And it is this council that has exceeded last year's tree planting target by 40% and is bidding for an additional 153,000 external funding to bolster this year's planting programme. What we need now is to work together to challenge Thames Water to take their responsibilities to Merton seriously. They have failed to maintain and invest in their network. They have failed to clear the silt from their sewers, and they have failed to listen to our residents. It is their failure that continues to have a profound impact on the well-being, security, and safety of our community. So, Mr. Mayor, I hope that in the interest of collaboration, of putting our community first and doing the right thing, that they back our amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, you're seconding the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As I said earlier, I would like to take this opportunity of thanking the work of council officers dealing with these exceptional events which took place in July and August of this year. To have a month's worth of rain in 90 minutes will put a considerable burden on any local authority. They have raised admirably to the task actually in responding to local residents, but also as well, the leader of the council was on the television the next day asking for Thames Water to seek assurances that assets were being maintained and that Thames Water would make it easier for residents to contact Thames Water. Sometimes hearing the Conservatives in this chamber, I do wonder whether they're shareholders of Thames Water or whether they've got any interest in them, because they seem to absolve all blame from their neglect, which is systematic, not just in Merton, but across London as a whole. As an organisation, I think they have acted absolutely appallingly, and the underinvestment, I think, has been shown to be the case in many places across the country. It is time that the government as well step up to the plate by putting tougher regulation on Thames Water in actually dealing with these serious issues. One of the frustrations for many residents in this borough is trying to contact Thames Water or trying to report things to them about issues that do arise. As a council, we have raised this with Thames Water. We continue to have regular meetings, and myself and Councillor Irons are having further discussions with them. It is clear they need to take action. It is clear that something needs to happen. This amendment is a reasoned amendment. It puts an element of reality in terms of the situation. We want action to happen, but it's time that Thames Water step up to the plate. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Holden, do you wish to use your right to reply?
Yes, please, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, very interesting points, and I looked at your amendment and some aspects of it aren't too bad. You obviously missed the point where I mentioned and welcomed the report that went to Suscoms the other week. You also, we've made it clear in the past that we have acted against Thames Water ourselves as well. We got them to do works, and we are made the point of saying that they do need to do more. But that's Thames Water. We are in the council here, so we like to look at things that's in council scope, not in Thames Water scope or the government scope or anything like that. That's for others to do in other places. So that's why our focus was on some of the things that we think can be done locally. And we thought our motion was rather straightforward and quite good, actually. But it's a shame that you didn't recognise that. We will work with you to take action against Thames Water, no doubt. We already do things on our own wards, but we don't like the fact that you absolve yourselves of any responsibility whatsoever, when clearly there is some that is council related, and it's just not all blamed on somebody else. So therefore, based on that, we'll be abstaining on your amendment.
I will now call for a vote on the amendment. Members raise their hands for. Against. Not voting. Notice the votes: for 28, against 6, 21 not voting. The amendment is carried. So now we vote on the call for a vote on the substantive motion as amended. Please, was that agreed or not agreed? Right. Please indicate for. Against? Not voting? Right. On the substantive motion as amended, 28 for, 27 not voting. So the substantive motion as amended is carried. We now move on to item 10. Item 10, Clarion Estate Regeneration Programme. There is an exempt appendix to this report, but I hope that we can conduct the debate without moving into closed session if possible. I'm aware that the Cabinet decision has been called in, so there will be an opportunity for members to have a more detailed discussion when it is considered by the Commission on the 19th of October. At this stage, the Council is simply being asked to note the Cabinet decision. Councillor Welton, will you move this report?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I formally move the report and recommendations to note the Cabinet's decision. This report is coming to Council as delivering regeneration of High Path, Eastfields and Ravensbury is a key priority for the Council. As a Council, we granted outline planning permission for the whole regeneration in 2018. Subsequent to that, we have granted detailed planning for all of the Ravensbury part of the regeneration and the first 2 stages of High Path. We gave the go-ahead as we recognised that much of the housing had come to the end of its life and needed rebuilding, but also the severe overcrowding issues on the estate. With the first part of Ravensbury now completed and first stage of High Path about to complete, it has seen high-quality homes delivered, and the process has already begun of people being rehoused in the newly built housing. This project will deliver over 2,500 new high-quality homes with commercial and community space across 3 estates,
It is the largest regeneration scheme in the 56-year history of Merton Council. All of us are aware of the disturbing insight highlighted by Daniel Hewitt and ITV in that documentary earlier this week, and that many tenants and the failure of Clarion to carry out the necessary repairs on that estate. As a council, we've been very clear that it is unacceptable and that regeneration cannot be used as an excuse not to undertake basics works. As Cabinet Member, I am having regular meetings with Clarion to discuss repairs in Eastfields and how they have been addressed. We have insisted as a council on much better, more regular communication between Clarion and residents as well as the council. This starts with a safely managed discussion to understand the views of tenants. Clarion are responsible for the supply and maintenance of the borough's housing stock, and we expect them to put this right. Every resident has the right to a decent standard of living. Therefore, as part of the report, we are asking Cabinet to support an amendment to the stock transfer agreement to commit Clarion to delivering decent home standards upgrades linked to any failure to achieve regeneration delivery milestones to ensure these works are guaranteed to be delivered within a specified time frame, irrespective of the status of the regeneration. This report also sets out how the regeneration is to be delivered, given the financial deficit in the project, which has been identified, and making it financially viable. Finances can fluctuate, and the changes that are being proposed will allow this to proceed. As part of the financial adjustment, this report asks that the 5% sales clawback mechanisms in private sale is taken out as long as it remains in the deficit position at programme level, and that in event that the project finances change and exceeds or break evens, then it will become payable to the council. It also seeks an amendment to the stock transfer agreement to specify partnership working arrangements between Clarion and the council. This includes open book business, planned process updates, and monitoring and regular identification, management and mitigation of risks to viability and deliverability. This is proposed to ensure proactive management and monitoring of future risks. We have also insisted as a council for continuing 100% nominations. Over the past year, we have robustly scrutinised, challenged, and iteratively developed through dialogue over the last 12 months by London Borough of Merton officers. We have also undertaken an independent financial viability assessment through SQW. This includes the identified viability deficit and a range of potential mitigation and value optimism. I ask Council to approve the recommendations in the report, and I ask that we don't support the Liberal Democrat amendment. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Allison, seconding the report.
I'd like to second and then reserve my rights until after I've heard the arguments for the amendment.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor Gretton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, what a shame that the Labour Cabinet has excluded the residents of Merton from this session as the Cabinet tries to hide the full extent of its own incompetence and failures. Transfer agreement put in place in 2010, transferring the High Parth, Eastfields and Ravensbury estates to Clarion, then in its predecessor form, Circle Housing. Clarion were obliged to invest tens of millions of pounds, Mr. Mayor, in the housing stock to bring it up to the statutory decent home standard of reasonable state of repair. In 2014, the Labour Cabinet let Clarion off and suspended the decent home standard, giving Clarion a green light to abandon the residents of High Parth, Eastfields and Ravensbury to the appalling standards we have seen reported on ITV News. No repairs, collapsed ceilings, mouldy flats, rodent and cockroach infestations. As you'll see from their many press releases over the years, Mr. Mayor, Clarion were in fact always happy to say they were already committed to the regeneration, but it's Councillor Allison and the not so business-like Cabinet, Mr. Mayor, they simply forgot to put a contract in place to properly tie Clarion into the regeneration when they sat down with them and agreed it in 2014. That's right, Mr. Mayor, this council failed and the Labour Cabinet failed to put a contract in place to properly tie Clarion in to a £1 billion housing project. What a disgrace that is, Mr. Mayor. And because Councillor Allison forgot to put the contract in place, Clarion, a £1 billion company with an operating margin of nearly £300 million a year, now has him over a barrel. pleading poverty based upon dubious forecasts from April 2020, when the entire country had shut down, and now asking Councillor Allison for £72 million of council support in giving up the council's clawback monies. A sum approaching £100 million, Mr. Mayor, not too far off the entire council tax for the borough. That's an absolute scandal, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, sometimes agreements with developers are reached to commence a development project. That was in 2014, but in this case, Councillor Allison's gifting Clarion £72 million, Mr. Mayor, 7 years, nearly 10 years into the whole project. That's the first in housing. And what a shame it is that the council forgot to have put in place a proper contractual commitment back in 2014. Mr. Mayor, we know that this Labour cabinet has a real mental block when it comes to contracts. Veolia, they think they won the lottery when they do business with Merton Council because of the incompetence of this Labour cabinet. But Mr. Mayor, if Veolia won the lottery, Clarion, with their Christmas gift of £72 million from Councillors Allison and Councillor Byers, have won the Euro million, Mr. Mayor. And then what a shame and disgrace it is that that £72 million has been lost for our borough by this cabinet's incompetence. Mr. Mayor, we cannot support the incompetence of this cabinet, and we oppose Councillor Allison's gift, this grotesque gift of £72 million to Clarion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Now, we've not moved into private session, and I just want to clarify that some of the figures that are being quoted can be quoted in public session. Can I ask that? Okay. Right. But I just want some clarification of whether we need to go into private session or not. Right, the high level that's been quoted so far is okay, providing there's no more detail than that, I'm assured. So just wanted to seek that clarification before calling Councillor Crowe, who's the next to speak. So please do bear that in mind. And we can move to private session if that's what we need to do, but I'm being guided by our officers here. So well, I'll take 1 minute out, please. Just Councillor Crowe, I'm going to ask you to speak. I will be, if there's anything that's said that's thought to be too much disclosure, then I can't just turn off the public display or whatever. We'd need to move into private session. So we'd have to resolve that. So I'm going to, well, can I just finish what I'm going to be saying now? So Councillor Crowe is the next one to speak. We've had advice that what's been said so far, although close to the mark, is not overstepping it. So please, Councillor Crowe, can you bear in mind any figures you're going to quote in doing that? Do you still need to raise a point of?
Mr. Mayor, there's nothing whatsoever in my speech that cannot be said. The entire purpose of my speech is about transparency, and the Lib Dem group will object very strongly to going into private session to stop hearing a speech about transparency.
Well, I've asked Councillor Crowe to speak now. Whether we go into private session or not is not my decision. That's the decision of the council here. And your way to object to that is to vote against that. But if it's carried, it would happen. So I just wanted to clarify that. It's not my decision. It will be the council's decision to go into private session. But at the moment, we're not there. Councillor Crowe, can you speak? And then I'll come for the amendment in a moment.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I shall try and speak in generalities. John Robert Wooden is a famous American basketball player, coach, and sage. well known for the aphorism, the true test of a man's character is what he does when no one is watching. Tonight, we are considering an exempt paper, but in a public meeting. We can see the exempt report, but the public can't. So in a real sense, the public is not watching. And the true character of each of us will soon be revealed. The report before us is exempt from public scrutiny, not because of the commercial confidentiality of the contract with Clarion. I mean, how can it be? The contract is being torn up. Rather, the report is exempt to hide Labour's past mistakes and its embarrassment over the recent perverse decisions of the Labour cabinet. Why is the Labour administration embarrassed? Simply because Clarion negotiated an initial contract that was outrageously favourable to them. And they've now repeated the trick with a financial viability study based on data from April 2020. Does anyone remember April 2020? Well, at 7 p.m. on Monday, the 6th of April, the Prime Minister was admitted to intensive care. These were the darkest days of the COVID crisis. Unbelievably, it is April 2020 that Clarion have chosen for their viability assessment. It's outrageous. It's a scandal. In April 2020, the Land Registry Index of Property Values in Merton dropped to 120.5. The index for June 2021, the latest available figures, is 126.4, an increase of 4.9%. And yet the Cabinet has chosen to suspend the 5% sales clawback at a cost to Merton of tens of millions of pounds. Yes, tens of millions of pounds. It's outrageous. It is a scandal. Naturally, we Conservatives will be voting to reject this outrageous and scandalous report and its recommendations. So for everyone else, the $64,000 question is, what will you do when no one is watching?
Can I call on Councillor McGrath to move the amendment?
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, a decision on a regeneration of an enormous amount of money should not be taken in a rush. It should be taken with as much transparency as possible, and the people most affected by the changes should be fully engaged. Mr. Mayor, without our amendment, Cabinet's decision is none of those things. The first time that any councillors knew about this enormous issue was at Sustainable Communities on the 2nd of September, when the public was excluded and a presentation was given, but with no paper copies. The first time the public knew was at the Cabinet on the 6th of September. And again, key documents were secret, as is the viability study that Merton has commissioned. Mr. Mayor, let's remind ourselves when Merton was first told about this in April 2020, 18 months ago. The council actually moved quite quickly, got a viability study by outside advisors by the end of June. What on earth has been happening since then? And what possible reason is there for not allowing councillors and those affected time to properly consider it? Earlier in this meeting, Councillor Welton said it was a very complex deal. He's absolutely right. And that's why everybody needs to have some time to think about it properly. Mr. Mayor, in my party, we believe that decisions which affect people should be made in consultation with those people, not just because it's a matter of principle, because we actually think you get better decisions that way. We also need to have, and this will to some degree happen with scrutiny, enough time for councillors to properly review the document. Reading the viability report, and I wonder how many members have had time to do that, I was struck by the importance in the whole issue of the financing costs. I'm not allowed to quote numbers, but the consultants have raised this as an issue, and the figures seem very different from what Clarion is actually borrowing at. I'd like time and understanding and explanation of what's going on there. This motion calls for transparency, as much transparency as possible. We've had to include some commercial caveats on the advice of the legal officer, but we would want Clarion to let us have everything in the public domain, but the most sensitive issues. and also a really thorough understanding of what the legal position is with Clarion and what we can hold them to. I really do find it quite difficult to imagine that Labour members are going to vote against a suggestion that we consult with tenants in social housing about something that makes such a huge difference to their future. So I'd ask them to think again and vote for this amendment. Thank you.
Councillor Kohler.
I formally second.
So, Councillor Alison, you have your right to reply. No, sorry, you reserved your right to speak, so you have the right.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I've listened very closely to what members have said, and I think it's very important that the administration listens and reflects on this very important issue. One of the biggest concerns that we have as a local authority and as local politicians is the very urgent need for housing. People who've lived through the pandemic that we have just lived through have spent a lot of time in terrible housing. And we should not delay any longer the opportunity of providing good housing for our most disadvantaged residents. And this is the upshot of what the other parties are suggesting is delay. We've been told we should not be in a rush to make a decision. You tell that to somebody who's living in an overcrowded house at the moment. You tell that to somebody who has mold on the walls and a screaming baby. You tell that to an old person who can't get down the stairs because the lift is broken. We've talked about past mistakes. I think we have to reflect that maybe one of the big past mistakes may have been back in 2009 under the previous administration, when it was agreed to carry out the stock transfer on the basis that there would be a very large regeneration and improvement of people's homes. And then within a year of that, a new government, a new Conservative and Liberal Democrat government, slashed funding for affordable housing and made it impossible for housing associations to deliver on their promises. All this time, we have wanted to do the right thing for people living on our estates, living in affordable housing in Merton, and people who don't live in affordable housing, but should live in affordable housing. There have undoubtedly been further changes over the past few years. Brexit has significantly added to construction costs. The Conservatives here are laughing. I have no idea why they're laughing about these additional costs that have been placed on housing providers. And also obviously COVID has created additional problems. Obviously this decision is going to be subject to a call-in, and we will listen. We're a listening council and we're a caring council. But we will listen, but we must act. If we do not support this programme, people will not be housed. I suspect that that may well be the motives of some people on the other side, that they do not want to see, that they do not, that they do. Well, we shall see what happens in planning committees. We shall see what happens when applications are put forward for housing. Who votes against them?
Excuse me, Councillor
the Labour Party side.
Could we just let the speaker speak?
The outrage is that people would like on that side to delay urgent housing, much needed by our residents. And we will not support this amendment. we will support the report, and I commend Councillor Welton and all the officers and residents who've been involved.
Thank you. Councillor Welton. I have no speakers, no further speakers, so Councillor Welton, do you wish to use your right to
Thank
reply?
you for allowing me the right to briefly respond to this debate. We have proposed amendments to the stock transfer agreement because we know that things needed to be tightened up from the originally signed agreement, which happened under the then Conservative administration. And this is part of this report here this evening. In terms of the evaluation, it was pre-pandemic. It was obviously completed then, but the figures were based on figures before then. Well, you were the one that signed stock transfer, David, and you were the leader at that time. So do take responsibility. You are the one that needs to take responsibility.
Can I please ask you to address me?
And
can you address?
And you need to take that in.
Do you want me to stand up? Please don't ask me to stand up.
And I will say that as a council, we want to deliver this regeneration scheme. These figures have been independently verified. They can be completely scrutinised in terms of the figures. And you will obviously see that within the figures itself, that this regeneration is still running at a loss. But I will say that we know we need to progress going forward. Residents expect this to happen. We said we will regenerate the estate, and that is something we want to deliver upon. And we are tough on Clarion. We will continue to be tough on Clarion. I ask council, therefore, this evening to support this motion. In terms of the Lib Dem amendment, there is some things that we could concur with, but unfortunately, there is parts we can't. That will be subject to, obviously, a meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission next month, where there will be a full opportunity to discuss this issue forward. Therefore, I ask council to support this tonight. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'll now call for a vote on the amendment. Members, raise your hands for the amendment. Against? Not voting? For 6, against 45, not voting for. So the amendment is lost. I now call for a vote, therefore, on the original motion, which is to accept the report. Is that agreed? Right. Okay, members indicate for. Against? Not voting. Right. The vote on the original motion is 28 for, 23 against, 4 not voting. So the original motion is carried. We've now hit 10:15. I'll just get confirmation of the exact time we started this meeting. 7:33, so the guillotine should fall at 10:33. I want to, first of all, ask whether we consider lifting the guillotine. Is that, no, okay. So in that case, we please bear that in mind in the timings you speak now on the next report. So that's the overview and scrutiny report, item 11. Councillor Southgate, will you move the report?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for the opportunity to bring the annual scrutiny report to Council tonight. You'll see this year we've updated the format to bring you a shorter, sharper and brighter report, or it would be brighter if you were viewing it in colour, as I did originally, not a black and white copy. Now, something you'll have noticed is missing from this report, Mr. Mayor, and it's my customary forward. You hadn't noticed? Anybody else notice? Ah, okay. We got back on our feet pretty quickly after the initial shock of the lockdown stopped everything last year. Taking guidance from the CFGS, we channeled all essential scrutiny through the Commission for 3 months until the summer break. And then when we returned to a full schedule of panel meetings in September. Through necessity, we learned that shorter agendas and verbal updates rather than long written reports could bring benefits in terms of a more focused approach and shorter meetings. But rather than going through what's in the report, which you can read, I'd like to tell you about what's coming to scrutiny in the months ahead, because it does illustrate how far the extent to which we are focusing on what interests and concerns our residents. Children and young people will be looking at the demand and supply of school places in the face of falling roles, from nursery all the way to secondary schools. Sustainable communities will address the perennial problem of fly tipping and how to increase the proportion of domestic waste that is recycled. Healthier communities are to investigate how long it takes to get a GP appointment and patients' experiences with online and telephone consultations. And the Commission will scrutinise the results of the Your Merton exercise, our biggest community engagement in peacetime. And the task group I'm really enthused by right now is our in-depth analysis of our 5 main high streets: Morden, Mitcham, Rains Park, Wimbledon and South Wimbledon. Now this has got us away from talking amongst ourselves and into the community, meeting with businesses and residents groups. And I have high hopes that we will come up with recommendations that will make a real difference to our town centres, to the benefit of those who work, shop and live there. And what of the pandemic? Well, it's still there, but after 18 months, we must find the confidence to move away from Zoom and Teams and start rebuilding relationships, not only with the community, but also between ourselves. I can't tell you how encouraged members were to have the borough commander attending the Commission meeting last week in person, especially as we had never met her before. In closing, I'd like to pay tribute to our hardworking scrutiny team, that's Lisanne Eddy, Stella Akinton and Rosie McIver, as they've done their level best to keep us going, even through the trials of hybrid meetings and fickle IT. Mr. Mayor, I'm pleased to commend the annual scrutiny report to you and to this council.
Councillor McCabe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will keep it brief. It's late, but I think it would be remiss of me as Vice Chair of Overview and Scrutiny not to thank Peter Southgate for his work and for his leadership. I think scrutiny has been effective this year. The report sets that out very clearly, and I think it speaks for itself, and I commend this to the council.
I have the following listed to speak. Councillor McLean.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would just like to add, nothing further to add on the report, but just also reiterate Councillor McCabe's comments and thanking Councillor Southgate and as Chair of the Overview and Scrutiny Commission, and also to Democracy Service, Andrew Robertson, his team, Amy, Rosie, and also Stella. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fear I'm going to break the cosy consensus. Nothing I'm about to say should take away from the fact we have excellent scrutiny officers, nor my personal regard for Councillor Southgate. But this council is far too complacent about scrutiny. This report is complacent. Page 2 talks about the £30 million that was quickly distributed. That had little to do with scrutiny. It had to do with the excellent work of our officers. Page 4 rehashes arguments over St Helier Hospital, of course. there's no mention of the failings of scrutiny. Moranton was a perfect failure of scrutiny. Councillor Allison, I'd remind you, sat on that decision, that recommendation for 6 weeks. If he believed in scrutiny, he would have had some pre-decision scrutiny. He would have used that to actually bring the council together on this issue to see if there were other solutions. But no, he didn't. The point is, both the cosy duopoly neither understand scrutiny and are distrustful of it. The administration appoint all the chairs, appoint from their own party, except of course the OSC, where nominally we have Councillor Southgate as the nominally independent chair, but of course he's there at the due to the Labour Party voting. The official opposition, of course, used scrutiny for political points. I've already pointed to Councillor Gretton wasting 15 minutes. Wasting 15 minutes in FMTG, and you say he was right, Councillor Holmes. But remember, in FMTG, he had this bizarre fantasy. There was no deficit. We should spend the money, and the government would pay it. Don't worry about it. That was his line. You're now saying the opposite. The point is, you're both happy with this cosy system, and it does not work. That's why you wrote it together to remove any chance of us being on the vice chair. You know, the Constitution said there should be a vice chair position for us by proportionality, but you didn't want it, so you voted against it. Scrutiny is important. One of Croydon Council, one of the reasons for Croydon Council going the way it did was a failure of scrutiny. And it should be used to hold the executive to account. That's the point. It should be cabinet members who come before scrutiny. It shouldn't be us quizzing officers. It should be cabinet members we hold to account. We rarely do that. And cabinet members look quite shocked when they're asked to. When we are in control of this administration, I vow to you, we will not appoint the chairs of scrutiny. We will use scrutiny to actually hold us to account. Yes, but we will see, Councillor Gretton. We will use scrutiny. Okay.
But Councillor, I have no other speakers indicating they wish to speak. So Councillor Southgate, you wish to use your right of reply.
So, Mr. Mayor, I mean, just basking as I was there in the praise from Councillors McCabe and McLean, but I do have sympathy with the points that Councillor Kohler is making. Yes, frankly, you know, there should have been pre-decision scrutiny on the Moranton decision, and that coming to Cabinet on, was it the 19th of December? And indeed, it was then subject to a call-in where we had a decent exploration of the issues, but afterwards there was a feeling that the real decision was taken at some point back there, which was hidden from view. And let me pick on I'll mention the Financial Monitoring Task Group does useful work in a constructive and informal way. And okay, I'm you know, then taking tweetable information out of it. You know, I guess it's going to happen, isn't it? But the atmosphere there is, under the expert chairmanship of Councillor Crowe, always very useful and productive. And scrutiny being used for political opposition, frankly, this worries me. I don't know how we control that other than by establishing or trying to reinforce a culture of respect in the way in which we discuss issues with one another. I think that is there currently. If I look at the work of the way the Commission works, I recognise it can be a fragile flower. We need to all believe that scrutiny must work in a non-party political way if it is to make a valuable achievement. Thank you.
Is the report agreed? Good. Thank you. Item 12, which is the change to membership of committees and other matters. Councillor Allison, you will move the report formally, I understand.
I move it formally, Mr. Mayor.
Fine.
Spoken. Well, you can use it if you want to, but is the report agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Petitions. Councillor Allison, will you move the report?
I so move.
It's formally seconded by Councillor Pritchard. Right. You have a position. Well, please bring forward any petitions that you wish and put them on the table here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a petition from 892 residents of Merton who want the council and Thames Water to take more urgent action on flooding.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have a petition. It was from the residents of Graham Road about a matter of parking, Mr. Mayor.
If there's no further speakers or petitions, that agreed? Great, thank you. Business for the next meeting. The next ordinary meeting of the council, can I ask Councillor McLean to put forward the strategic theme for the next meeting?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sustainable communities with a focus on enforcement.
I think that concludes the business of the meeting. Can I just make one comment that we've gone off track once or twice tonight, and I noticed that it happens then when people are not speaking to me. When people are speaking across the chamber, that's when things tend to go a bit awry. So I am chair, I'm the mayor, so please speak to me when you're speaking. It's easy for those of you at the back, maybe as nearer the front, it's not quite so easy, but okay, thank you very much. Please have a